way to end it is if everyone will pay attention to what they hear and what they see. If you see something, you can help by calling the proper authorities who can assist the victims. Thank you.
Well, thank you for being here, and thank you for representing all of us on the Commission, the Status of Women, and thanks to the other members of the Commission who are here with you tonight as well.
Thank you.
We'll move on now to our consent calendar, if the City Clerk would call that.
Consent calendar. All items will be considered and approved in one motion unless removed by a council member for discussion. And we have 2 requests to speak.
And let me ask Councilmember Himmelrich if anybody has shown up in New York who wishes to speak on this item. We'll hold to get an answer on that. Now, let's open the public hearing. We'll begin with Denise Barton, followed by People of California. Councilmember Himmelrich, if you're listening there in New York, we're just wondering if anybody has shown up who wishes to speak on this item. We're going to have to check with you on each item to make sure that there's no member of the public there. If the clerk could make sure we actually still have Councilmember Himmelrich on the line. Meanwhile, Ms. Barton, you've asked for 2 minutes on this item.
Good evening. So you can put a minimum of 20 cars for a car share program. You're so hypocritical. In addition, you're taking away parking spaces both downtown and in residential neighborhoods for this. You do realize that almost all neighborhoods, including Wilmot, are already having a hard time with available parking. But obviously you don't care and want to take away more parking from residents. Next, the Big Blue Bus, which tonight will cost well over $5 million, for an incompetent, inept, unreliable bus system, for which most lines end before 9 p.m. I think you've overextended a small city bus system, trying to make it into something it's not. To Metro's benefit, of course. Would this be why I've seen less people on the buses? And to file for grant funding, I know employees cost money, so saying there's no cost associated with this item is rather deceptive. Finally, the scam relating to the city lots parking management. And maybe this time my right to free speech won't be taken away by Mayor Kevin McEwen like the last meeting. Isn't it interesting that SP Plus is the current operator of the parking management for the city, merged with another company? So of course they scored the highest on your evaluation. They already knew.
And then, of course, we've got the need for the trash extractor on the catch basins. It seems like those things are going to clog eventually, and there's got to be some sort of plan to get that trash out of the catch basin. Preventing it by having a screen that lifts when it gets clogged only lets the stuff in later. Doesn't really stop anything. And, of course, we're subsidizing the county since we're doing their catch basins, too.
Well, thank you. And Councilmember Himmelrich is now checked for us. There are something like 8 million people in New York City, and shockingly, not a single one of them wants to speak to the Santa Monica consent calendar tonight. So that will close the public hearing, and the consent calendar is before the council first to see if anybody wishes to pull any items. And it doesn't appear anybody does, so I'll entertain a motion to adopt the consent calendar.
So moved.
Second.
So it's been moved by Mayor Pro Tem Vasquez and seconded by Councilmember Davis. No one has requested to speak, so we'll do a roll call vote, including Councilmember Himmelrich in New York. So Councilmember Himmelrich, stand by.
Councilmember O'Connor?
Yes.
Councilmember O'Day?
Yes.
Councilmember Winter?
Yes.
Councilmember Himmelrich?
Yes.
Councilmember Davis?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Vasquez?
Yes.
And Mayor McKim.
Yes, so that passes. The consent calendar is adopted by unanimous vote, 7-0 of the City Council. And we move on to item 7A.
Item 7A, second reading and adoption of ordinance repealing ordinance number 801 CCS and adding chapter 2.05 to the Santa Monica Municipal Code regarding procedures for the administration of employer-employee relations.
And of course, it being a second reading, there won't be a public speaker on this, but do we have a very brief staff report to explain what we're doing? On item 7A, is there anybody prepared to do a staff report?
Well, there's no staff report per se. This is just a second reading for adoption.
Because we have the split meeting with New York, I just thought we'd be clear on what we're doing so that Councilmember Himmelrich and anybody who showed up in New York knows what we're on. So this is a second reading of an ordinance we passed at our last meeting, and we'll just do it by roll call vote then.
And may I call for a motion?
Oh, I'm sorry, yes.
I'll move adoption. Second.
Second.
So it's been moved by Councilmember Winter, seconded by Councilmember O'Day, and we'll do a roll call vote.
Mayor Pro Tem Vasquez?
Yes.
Councilmember Davis?
Yes.
Councilmember Himmelrich?
Yes.
Councilmember Winter?
Yes.
Councilmember O'Day?
Yes.
Councilmember O'Connor?
Yes.
And Mayor McCune.
Yes, so that's unanimous, 7-0 to the council members of all present, including Councilmember Himmelrich in New York. And that connection seems to be working pretty well. Let me ask Councilmember Himmelrich, are you situated with a video stream so that you can see the presentations that are being made as we go into the land use items?
I'm sorry, will you repeat that? It's sort of shaky here. I have to say it's a difficult situation.
Are you able to see the presentation, or will you be relying on the printed material you've previously been sent?
I have the printed material here. Thank you.
Okay, because we are streaming on the internet as we always do tonight, so.
But I am looking at you streaming. I'm looking at you streaming, but I'm doing audio separately because there's a disconnect between the
Okay.
two.
That clarifies. There is a buffer time on the video. It's a few seconds behind. So Councilmember Himmelrich is, just so people know, how is she voting on something she didn't see? Well, actually, she is seeing the material that we are. She's just seeing a few seconds later. So we can go ahead and call item 7B.
Item 7B, introduction and first reading of an ordinance adopting development agreement 12 DEV 003 to allow a new 6-story, 84 feet, 52,545 square foot mixed-use project consisting of 64 residential units and 6,345 square feet of ground floor commercial space at 1415 5th Street. And we have 8 requests to speak.
And may I ask Councilmember Himmelrich if there are any people who have requested to speak in New York?
There is no one here requesting to speak.
Good, thank you. We're ready for the staff report. Good evening.
There we go. Good evening, Mayor and council members. Russell Bunham here with the City Planning Division, presenting the first of 2 development agreements before you this evening. The first one that I'll be presenting is located at 1415 5th Street. It's a mixed-use residential housing project. The location of the project is closer to the corner of Santa Monica Boulevard and 5th Street, so that you could help get the restaurants of Volcano and Draft here on the corner. And there's some across the street is some some residential buildings that's also owned by the applicant this evening, NMS. The property is zoned C3C, which is the actual prior zoning district, as the current zoning code does not incorporate downtown, and soon that will be covered by the downtown specific plan. The lot size is 15,000 square feet, which is a double lot. Looking at the existing site, it's currently a 2-story commercial and office building, and photos on the screen there show what is currently proposed. It's an 84-foot tall 6-story building with a couple mezzanines. It's got 3 subterranean parking levels. It's just over 52,000 square feet, and about 7,000 square feet of that is commercial square feet with an outdoor patio in the front. There's a mix of units on the site, from studios to 3 bedrooms with a bedroom factor of 1.2. Looking at some of the design components of the building, it takes a unique approach to the step backs that we've typically seen for residential buildings in the downtown that have prior had some step backs to the upper floors. The architect in this case has taken some of the open space and applied that to the ground floor and to the center of the building to create usable open space instead of step backs on the upper floors. The site also incorporates, as guided by the downtown specific plan, an extra 3 feet of setback to create an essential 15-foot sidewalk walkable area. Getting into the inside of the building to look at kind of what's on the floor plans of the building, you can see that ground floor open space that the applicants created, ground floor commercial tenant space with a small mezzanine above it, along with the transportation demand management plan facilities, which include short-term bicycle parking here at the front, some long-term bicycle parking for the commercial tenants in the back with shower and locker room facilities, along with some long-term residential bicycle parking, and there's more additional residential long-term bicycle parking on the subterranean floors. Looking at the first floor of the residential component of the building, you see a 3,400 communal courtyard of the building. There's also on the floor above that a 1,200 square foot gathering space that we looked at that looks out over 5th Street. And you'll see that the pedestrian bridges above the communal area are how residents access their units. So this project went to the Planning Commission on July 22nd of 2015, and they recommended approval based on the findings in the development agreement, and had some proposed the following changes, which included an extra studio affordable unit, maximizing solar panels on the roof, ensuring that any irrigation system would be just as sufficient as a drip irrigation system. They discussed active neighborhood serving uses on the ground floor, and they wanted Architectural Review Board to pay particular attention to a few items in the design. So this is the development agreement, and staff conducted a negotiation with the applicant prior to Planning Commission and incorporated Planning Commission's recommendations that the applicant has agreed to. The few main community benefits that we'd like to point out are the affordable units. 14 affordable units on the site, which is almost 22% of the 64 units included on the site. Physical improvements to the plan, a TDM program, and I did want to note that there's a typo on page 12 of the DA that the water conservation plan discusses 1.5 gallons per day instead of 2.2 gallons per day. The fees that we typically charge for development impact fees at building permit have been increased for this Tier 3 project at about 35% over the base of development. Staff worked pretty hard on this application and both of these two projects to bring before you the most sustainable buildings for development agreement that we've had in downtown thus far, which include, as the Planning Commission recommended, the extra photovoltaics on the roof that you could see here in the image above of the roof plan. And then we discussed water uses on site being 30% below for interior use, 15% below for energy use, providing 10% of the total parking spaces on site for electric vehicle. And for the first time, we've included a large sum, which is $300,000 towards a water conservation program that would be managed by Office of Sustainability and the Environment. As always, with a development agreement, we had an economic analysis completed for this project. Kaiser Marston Associates conducted that for us. This project received a CEQA exemption to comply with the CEQA guidelines. And staff's recommendation is to introduce a reading of an ordinance adopting the proposed development agreement. Available if you have any questions.
Okay, Council will also be hearing from the applicant in a moment. We have questions for staff on this project. I don't see any, so thank you very much. And for those who haven't watched us do a development agreement before, this is a negotiated contract between the city and a developer that will be codified as an ordinance, so the process is a bit different from most of our public hearings. We will hear now from the applicant, who is being represented by Dave Rand, and he will have 10 minutes to explain the project to us from his point of view. Hi.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Dave Rand with the firm Armbruster Goldsmith and Delvac, representing the applicant this evening, NMS Properties. Mayor, just a point of clarification, can I reserve 3 minutes for rebuttal if needed?
You may.
Thank you.
So you'll have 7 minutes now, and you'll hold 3 to rebut anything the public may say.
Thank you very much. This project, Council, was first submitted in early 2012, and after 3.5 years, community meetings, ARB float-ups, Planning Commission float-ups, we are very pleased to be before you tonight. From the moment this project was submitted to the city, it stood out. It stood out because of the design. We've all heard the complaints that development downtown has taken on a dull, monotonous building form rhythm, that there's nothing interesting, nothing unique, nothing that really pops in the downtown in terms of architecture. And with this design, truly mid-block on 5th Street, if approved and built, a new dynamic building will stand out. A building that flips the traditional wedding cake step-back notion on its head and opens up a hole, a courtyard internal to the building that allows for light, air, and ventilation to the units, that relieves the building mass as viewed from the street, and a wide open plaza area with high floor-to-floor ceilings on the ground floor to create a destination space on 5th Street. The project site is located in the heart of the transit priority area that's defined in the draft specific plan, where the document seeks to concentrate density near transit. This project, as the mayor mentioned, requires a development agreement, and I recognize development agreement has become a pejorative term in this town. People are skeptical of the process. It takes a lot of time and effort on staff's part. It takes resources, and it's frankly no picnic for the development side either. But my client entered into this process listening to the council's policy directives and with the goal of coming before you tonight with a project and a package of community benefits that we could truly tout as unprecedented and unparalleled. And I believe that's what we have for a project of this size this evening. As Russell mentioned, 22% of the units are deed restricted for affordable housing. But if you get into those numbers, it tells an even more important story. 71% of the affordable component will be deed restricted to 50% AMI or less, very low income levels. The average bedroom factor of the affordable component of the project actually slightly exceeds that of the overall market rate component of the project. With respect to sustainability, it's a LEED Platinum project, but you've seen that before. But where this DA really breaks new ground, in our view, is with respect to water conservation. The project has aggressive targets for interior and exterior use below Cal Green standards, a $300,000 water sustainability fund, and is literally regulated fixture by fixture. Toilets, shower heads, clothes washers, bathroom faucets, kitchen sinks. Everything is identified as low flow below Cal Green to make sure that we have the most sustainable project that conserves as much water as possible. The project is also trend-setting with respect to its TDM plan. It has ADR targets of 2.2 and a commitment to fund 100% of resident and employee transit passes in perpetuity for those residents and employees who forego a car. In addition, I'll note the project has annual penalties, financial penalties, in the event of non-compliance. So this TDM plan not only is aggressive, but it has teeth. And in addition to all that, $800,000 of funding for various important city programs. So at the end of the day, with respect to design, sustainability, transportation demand management, and community benefits, we think this is a project that the city can truly be proud of, and we hope that you see it the same way. And with that, I'd like to call up the project architect to tell you a little bit more about design for a minute or two, Mr. Michael Flonis.
Good evening, Michael Flonis, architect. First, what I wanted to talk a little bit about is how this hole in the building came about. Typically, what you see are buildings that face our boulevards that are complete a facade with no punctures in them. So what we'd see here is a facade that had an additional 6 units rather, on that facade. What we were trying to do was do two things, is to get more light and ventilation into the building itself, rather than just coming from the top, which is open, connect residents to the street in this large open space, which is 45 feet wide. It's about where you're sitting to the back wall wide, and it's twice as tall as the space we're in now. So there's going to be an abundance of natural light and ventilation getting into the space. This is how we arrived at it. The cubic footage of the step back, the normal step back, would be about 84,600 cubic feet of void. What we came up with was 88,500 square feet of void. So it's actually about a third of the facade is missing. There's an opening in it, so there's less mass on the street. It also allows people that live here to make a connection. Normally they're blocked off. The only time they have a connection to the street is if they leave their unit, take the elevator down, and walk out onto the street. Now they have the ability to make a connection above the street level, which is a completely different set of principles and ideas and planning ideas. But we thought this was an appropriate place for it, and a design that really started to connect the residents with the street. every single one of these units has light and ventilation from both ends of the unit. It's not just from one side, but it's both sides of the unit. So we can get cross ventilation, thereby hopefully reducing mechanical systems to cool the space. We also pulled the facade. It was a directive from the Planning Commission to pull the facade forward, reduce the plaza space, and deepen the commercial space. So what this has done for us is, well, here's another sustainable aspect of the building. It has some panels that'll roll across and block light getting into the space, harsh light at the end of the day.
Mr. Falonis, that was the end of the 7 minutes that Mr. Rand had decided he wanted to hold 3. Mr. Rand, given that Mr. Falonis was not done, do you want to shift that determination and save less time, or?
Sure, maybe another minute.
All right, so we'll go 8 and 2 instead, and we'll give you 1 more minute, Mr. Falonis, but know that you just have 1 more minute.
Okay, thank you. So here's the roof. A little less than half of the roof is covered with photovoltaics. If you have Mr. Zinner will be able to answer questions about what sort of energy that produces for the building itself. The rest of the roof is used for the tenants, for outdoor facilities. These are the bridges that connect the units, so there's a lot of interaction between the vertical as well as the horizontal spaces within the building. A view of the building in the evening, and a back looking at the front facade again. I'd be happy to stop now and let Mr. Dave Rand take the rest of this time. If you should have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them for you.
Mr. Rand has 2 minutes left. You've run out the 8 minutes. Council, first let me announce that apparently there are more exciting things to do in New York, and Councilmember Himmelrich has disconnected from the meeting and sent a message that she trusts the rest of the council to handle the matters before us tonight. So that if the public shows up in New York, I don't know how that works. I really don't. I guess they'll all have to go out and do something together. So now we have an opportunity to ask any questions we have of the applicant before we go to the public hearing. Are there any questions from the council? Mayor Pro Tem Vasquez.
Yeah, I just had a question. You mentioned, it's kind of interesting, this concept of cutting out the center there. But you, in your opening or in your remarks, you mentioned that you hope it's going to cool it off. Has it been tested anywhere? I know you're trying to deal with it without having, I guess, sophistication in terms of air conditioning and stuff. It's in that center area.
There'll be air conditioning. The center area, mind you, is open all the way through, all the way through the entire building. It's only one piece of the building. I actually, if I can show you a plan. There's a plan. So what you see on the left is the hole that leads you back into that courtyard space. Is there's a hole punched in the alley side so we can get through ventilation and ventilation from above as well.
The reason I bring it up is that the opening of the new Edison School, and the architects also created some, I guess, very creative ways to cool that facility without. They used some kind of a system that they relied on the cement slab to cool off at night.
Right.
And then this heat we've been getting, it hasn't worked.
Well, we're not relying on anything. All of the units will have heat and air, but what we're saying is because the units are open on both ends, both sides, that as the and this is a kind of an anomaly, but we do get it every year at this sort of time. We get the Santa Ana condition, which we don't get onshore, we get offshore. So when we get onshore breezes, it'll move through the building and ventilate the building, and it'll ventilate that entire core space as well.
And when you get Santa Ana, then what do you do in that case?
Then what we get is we get winds that are offshore. So they're coming from what effectively is
But those are hotter winds, aren't they?
That's right. And so this wouldn't work as well But we're not relying on that. That wasn't the whole principle and set of
Because
ideas.
you have a cooling system to back it up anyway.
Right.
Okay, thanks.
And I live on Navy Street, and what we've been doing in the evenings is opening windows in the building and ventilate the building at night, and it's tolerable.
In this weather, if we all start to share our apartment and house cooling methods, we could be here a long time. I could tell
Yes.
you about fans and screen doors and operable windows, and we're not going to go there. Councilmember Davis, questions for the applicant or the architect?
I'm wondering if you could just discuss, because there's some intriguing greenery usage in this building, and I think some of the people who are just looking at the pictures might not understand, if you haven't looked at the whole packet, what you're trying to do with what you're calling the various garden areas, the garden of feeder, the garden of filter, and the garden of cornucopia. If you could just describe those very briefly.
I will do my best. The landscape architect isn't here, but this is a very serious collaboration about how we, and this is a proven system. So one of the issues that we heard from the Planning Commission was the amount of ground floor planters we had within the plaza space. So what we sat down with the landscape architect, and as a collaboration we came up with this idea about hanging the gardens so it didn't impede that plaza space with planters on the ground level. So I wish I could be more clear about the systems that's being employed here, but they are throughout this large aperture in the building. They're up there, and then they're also hanging into the courtyard space above the heads of people, and then on the roof they're now moving vertically up rather than vertically down. So it's a consistent set of principles and ideas about landscape, but not interfering with the ability for people to move in those outdoor spaces.
And as I understand it, for example, you'll have edible vegetables according to the plan, for example, in the rooftop space, that sort of thing.
That would be the idea, that hopefully either all or most of everything could be edible.
Great. And then finally, I want to note that it says that would all be manually irrigated, so we wouldn't have a water conservation issue there. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay, thanks.
Councilmember Winchler.
So on the water issue, I mean, there's a lot of admirable sustainability features in this project. I'm glad to see staff and applicants really pushing those to the next level beyond what we've seen in this city. But I don't know if you know the answer, or Mr. Zinner, perhaps. Do we know how much water this building would use compared to the existing uses?
Mr. Zinner could address that.
With staff's assistance, we got close to that today. We did a whole building analysis, which shows it's about 40% below code. Staff was doing research on what the current building is using and sent us half of it. I didn't get the second half to even roll it in. If you assume our analysis on cover, I think it was about 6,066. It's less than 6,000 gallons difference per day.
So
for 60 some odd units. The units by themselves would use about 60 gallons per unit of water. That's not counting any demand from the retail, so it's actually less per residential unit when you take into account the retail.
So you're suggesting you'd use 6,000 gallons more per day than the existing use?
A little less from the numbers we came up with late this afternoon.
Okay. All right. Thanks. And then question for Mr. Rand, I guess, about the Planning Commission's condition number 8, which would establish a mechanism whereas upon adoption of the DSP, this building could come back for additional discretionary review to add a 7th story. Is that something you want?
Yes.
I mean, you've been at this 3.5 years, and you would still wait until us to approve the DSP in June, and then wait however many months after that for an additional discretionary review to add another story.
Gluttons for punishment, sir.
Why not just wait until after the DSP and come back with a new project instead of us? We could all be home right now.
No. The idea here is we do want to get a project approved tonight, and a project that we want to build, and that's the project before you. As you know, the historic height limit in the downtown, which still governs today based on the 84 loose, is 84 feet, but a 6-story limitation. And so all that provision says is, in the event the DSP is adopted, and the DSP allows 84 feet, but does not limit stories, which is the current draft that's circulating, then we could have the option to come back and pursue a discretionary approval that would allow more units, provided those units set aside the same amount of affordable housing that the base project has. And it's an option that we would potentially consider.
All right, and this may be a question more for your architect than for you, but right now what you have is a very intriguing and attractive building, in part because you have a 24-foot ground floor to ceiling height on the ground floor and mezzanine there, and clearly it must be pretty substantial ground floor to ceiling heights in the upper residential levels. And if you add a 7-story there, doesn't that smush everything down into something that's much more mundane and much more like the buildings you originally suggested were trying not to emulate downtown?
No, the exterior of the building, which you see, wouldn't change at all. And we ran the analysis. It would look virtually identical. Obviously, the internal residential floor-to-floor heights may change a little bit, but as viewed from the street and the exterior, it stays virtually exactly the same. And that was actually looked at quite carefully while we were negotiating the development agreement and talking about this provision with the Planning Commission. Did I get ahead of my skis there?
Slightly. Yeah, the floor-to-floor heights would not change at all. Because of the mezzanines, we
so
didn't
you'd use the mezzanine as that
as a
extra
floor,
story.
as basically
But
a
then
floor.
you
It's
would,
not a floor.
so what would that leave you on the floor-to-ceiling heights on the ground floor then? I mean, you're at 24 now, right? So you take out 10, doesn't get you down to 14 on the floor.
No, we don't have to modify the envelope at all. Everything fits the way it is. We looked at it pretty carefully to make sure that the mezzanine spaces were the same floor-to-floor height as all the other spaces.
And so it doesn't change the heights on the exterior fenestration or anything like that?
Nothing.
Okay, all right, thank you.
I mean, if we proposed any change at all, it might be slight fenestration on those upper units, but I don't think I would do that just because of the way the building has sort of scaled itself now. And I think the proportions work better if it's not just repetitive all the way up to the 7th floor from the 2nd floor.
Okay, Councilmember O'Day.
If I might, I'd like to correct my number. We did a lot of analysis last couple of days. I got lost. I apologize. It's actually better. Our analysis that we did on this building showed about 4,200 gallons a day. The current uses are close to 900 gallons a day. So it comes into somewhere between 3,300 and 3,400 gallons a day of new demand.
Thank you for that. I figured you wouldn't have come back if the numbers weren't better. So, Councilmember O'Day.
My questions were actually addressed, except I wanted to ask the architect, Mr. Flonis, if you could describe the treatment on the sides of the building for these front units and the fenestration, and how some of them wrap around and produce a view. Some of them are blocked with sort of a blinder. What's the thinking on there?
Well, we know that, when this building goes up, what we would project is a completely blank facade facing what amounts to be southwest, and we didn't think that was acceptable because no one knows if a building's ever going to get built next door. So what we tried to do was articulate that side so that it had these, what they sort of read like are panels that are kind of moving in and out from the facade.
Yep.
And
those are nice. What I'm talking about is the front units, the middle two, I guess the 5th floor and the 4th floor wrap around, but the 6th floor and the 2nd and 3rd floors don't. How do you think about those things?
It was intentional that we break up that facade. Yeah, so that it didn't have a complete vertical facade at the corner, but it had some articulation, it's some breakup of that of that mass. And also the Planning Commission, I think in your recommendations, asked that we build a wall at the ground floor that is between us and the building to the south that could be removed in later if a building went in next door. So that could be removed, and maybe what that would do is provide for the opportunity for somebody who's doing the site next door to develop a little plaza that connected both of these sites together. And so that's, we thought that was a great idea, and that's, we'll certainly deal with the structural issues to accomplish that.
Well, thank you. With that, I don't see any more questions coming from the council, so you will have a couple of minutes left after the public hearing to respond to anything that you may hear, but we'll now open the public hearing on item 7B. And as usual, I will call 3 speakers at a time, ask them to come up and be prepared so that we don't wait in between. Our first speaker is Denise Barton, followed by Jason Islas and Jonathan Hughes. Ms. Barton, you've asked for only 1 minute on this item. Good evening.
Good evening. I found this project very interesting. It was interesting that the outdoor dining area, which is included in the commercial use, is also considered open space, as well as being one of the reasons the developer thinks he doesn't have to set back the upper levels of the building. What happened to affordable housing? Would you be discriminating by not including 30% AMI affordable housing? This project claims to allow cross-ventilation, but with the mass and density of the building, how will the air get through from the street to the alley? Of course, this project is at the maximum height limit and wants to go higher. Isn't 84 feet supposed to be allowed for exceptional projects? And would this really be one? Then the staff report jumps from one set of rules and guidelines and time periods to another, really making it look like you're working the system. Thank you.
Next speaker is Jason Islas.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. I just wanted to come, my name is Jason Islas. I'm speaking as a member of the community and resident of the region. And I particularly enjoy this project. I particularly like the fact that there is a cash out option for people who don't drive and get transit passes. I would love to be able to talk to my landlord about that. Since I don't have a car. I think that's great. This is a jobs-rich area of Santa Monica, and it cries out for housing, a lot more of it. This particular project, I think, is a thoughtful approach. I like that the ground floor plays really well with the streetscape, and that it doesn't feel like a fortress at the street level, at least in this rendering. I'm personally hopeful that place next to it does get another building. I think single floor retail in a job-rich area like downtown cries out for more housing. I want to speak to the fact that it's great that there are going to be 14 affordable units, but also when I'm planning to move to Santa Monica, I'm glad that there'll be another 40-some people who make a lot more money than I do, who won't be competing for the same apartments in the Wilmont or other parts of town. They'll be living here instead of fighting for me for the scarce housing resources. But going forward, I think, again, this is great, and we have to keep in mind that the downtown, what's missing there is a lot of housing. And I think this is a great project and should go forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Jonathan Hughes, followed by Nancy Coleman and Ellen Brennan. Mr. Hughes, good evening.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for taking the time to allow me to speak for you today on an issue that is holding back Santa Monica and those who are proud to be part of such a great community. My name is Jonathan Hughes, and I am here representing the Santa Monica College Associated Students Council. I also chair our ad hoc committee to combat student homelessness, and I will be reporting back to our board the decisions that you make today regarding the increase in affordable housing in Santa Monica. SMC is a community college, and as such does not have dorms. A recent on-campus study found that 74% of students are interested or very interested in living in an off-campus housing program in Santa Monica. SMC has a student body where 58.3% of students live at home with a parent, guardian, or relative, and every student commutes, some of them 2 hours each way. We need more affordable housing in Santa Monica. I am here to announce my support for the 2 apartment developments today, the one here at 1415 5th Street and the other at 1560 Lincoln Boulevard. I support these initiatives for the following factors. There's greater than 20% of the building units will be classified as affordable housing. Each will maximize the use of solar power, the continued commitment to water conservation and other sustainable projects, a commitment to public beauty with enhanced design and accessible art. I urge you to remain diligent in providing more buildings like these. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Nancy Coleman.
Thank you. I'm Nancy Coleman. I live at 349 Euclid Street, and I'm speaking for myself tonight. I don't think that you should adopt any DA agreements until you have an approved DSP. The DSP will maybe tell us how the parking and the roads will be used in and around the downtown specific area. I think that the fact that this is less than 100 units, it doesn't have to come under CEQA yet. We're not talking about we're talking about multiple buildings in multiple areas around the downtown area, adding housing, adding businesses, and adding commercial space without adequate knowledge as to whether or not what the impact is on the city as a whole, that is on the traffic. This building is too tall. It's 84 feet plus the potential of 14 additional feet for uses like air conditioning and other kinds of things. I would ask that we not approve this until we have a DSP. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Ellen Brennan, and Ms. Brennan will be followed by Art Casillas and Andrew Hoyer. Ms. Brennan, good evening.
Good evening. I need to hold this up closer. Can you hear me? Yes.
Here, you're fine.
I may be the most unpopular person in this room, but I'm about to say that I think that's a hideous looking building. I don't think there's anything attractive about it at all. That said, this request for a development agreement could careful scrutiny. First of all, the request is made by MSF LLC. LLC stands for Limited Liability Company. That means that MSF will be the general partner, maintaining control while they sell off as many limited partnerships as is possible. These limited partnerships are purchased by wealthy individuals and corporate pension plans for the monthly income they provide. So these projects must generate the high percentage of income. That's why the parking is unbounded, so that they can be sold at going market rates. The rents will not be rent controlled, so they can be raised at general partners' discretion each year. So the limited partners will be expecting increasing cash from each year. This development agreement calls for a 6-story building with an additional later addition of 7 stories and additional units if the Downtown Pacific Plan permits it. It also calls for the ARB to approve the design of the east facade, but the ARB has no experience in design. They have been limited to voting only on signage. So in essence, if you approve this development agreement, you're allowing this syndication. MSS is not a developer, they're a syndicator. You'll be improving a deficient building of 6 to 7 stories on a lot where there has been a 1-story building. This project will bring more traffic into the area. It will take parking away from the area since it will not provide parking, and tenants and lessees will likely not purchase parking, but instead choose to park in the streets or in the existing parking lots. MSS is asking you to give them additional height so they can stuff more rent-producing units into the project so they can sell off the maximum limited partnerships, recouping their development costs, and let them unbundle the parking to produce additional income for their limited partnerships. MSF will be selling our skyline, our lighting, our parking, and our streets to their limited partners. We deserve better.
Thank you, Ms. Brennan. Next speaker is Art Casillas. Mr. Casillas, you've asked for 2 minutes.
Them is fighting words. Beneficial to the community. In the first place, who asked you to sell out one of our most prestigious, beneficial, God-given benefits? Our seashore cannot be restored, nor rebuilt, nor reassembled once you've destroyed its artistic beauty, rich presence, but most of all, life-giving, saving, and fresh air resource. As of late, with all the hot air temperature, who would be stupid, crazy, and irresponsible enough to give away our sought the world over, our clean, clear, fresh, cool air and oxygen? use Santa Monica City Council's renters' rights, say you're allowing higher buildings in exchange for more supposed affordable housing units. But for gentrification, you're giving them the rich white folks coming out from out of town, so that doesn't sound like diversity. Already sounds unconstitutional, not allowed in rich white areas, NIMBY. If it's affordable housing you want, you've known about President Obama's HUD Fair Housing Act since 2013, which gives you funding to include Mexicans, blacks, and Asians in your richer white neighborhoods to help us meet middle class stature. Now again, how does building tall buildings, creating walls that cut off clean air, oxygen, and trap smog and prevents temperature circulation benefit us? I think at election time we need to elect specifically lifelong residents whom appreciate what God has bestowed on us. Remember, Los Angeles buildings are caging us in from Centinela. Thank you.
And our last speaker in the public hearing is Andrew Hoyer.
Good evening. My name is Andrew Hoyer. I'm the president of Santa Monica Mid-City Neighbors. I agree with Jane, I think, who said we should not be approving this until we have the downtown specific plan in place. Number one, if we compare this to mixed-use boulevard with the ratio of units, we've determined for mixed-use boulevard we don't want any more than 15% studios. This one has 20% studio units. The ratio, the mix of units, 3-bedroom and 2-bedroom, really only adds up to 31% of the total of this property, this building. That's not enough. That's not what we need in Santa Monica. We don't need more 1-bedrooms, more studio units. We've got a lot of those. You guys have been very busy building those already. We need 2- and 3-bedroom units for students to share, for workers to share, and for people to create families who want to stay here and contribute to Santa Monica. So number one, I'd tell them to come back with a different ratio. Number two, I agree with Jason. I'd love to see that building next door be a couple more stories high, maybe 3 stories max, and then we could bring this one down to 3 stories. Be very nice, nice and low, lots of units. So I don't agree with approving 84-foot structures in our downtown at this time, at least not until we have the DSP done. Also, the issue of counting restaurant as open space, but it's not open space. Can I sit down there and read a book? Or am I going to be asked to buy something or leave? So is that open space? That's not open space. That's not open space for the public. So there's a little bit of stuff right there. I really think that's about all I have for this. They got a lot of neat designs, and the LEED certification is great, and I like the edible gardens. But again, I think it's a little too big. And number one, 2- and 3-bedroom units. That's what we need in this community, 2- and 3-bedroom units. Thank you.
Thank you. I knew you would like the edible gardens because we've seen photos of your gardens at previous council meetings. The Santa Monica City Council welcomes our audience on KCRW who have just joined us. We're on item 7B, a development agreement for 1415 5th Street, and we have just concluded the public hearing on that. Now, the applicant had reserved 2 minutes to rebut anything said in the public hearing. So, Councilmember Winter, do you have a question for Mr. Hoyer or for the applicant? Okay. We'll get to the staff, but we have 2 minutes now from the applicant. Mr. Rand, you've got it.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple of points in response to some of the testimony. The ARB and the Planning Commission, when this project went before them, both had extensive conversations about height, not surprisingly. Both bodies overwhelmingly agreed that 84 feet, given this building design at this location, was appropriate. The Planning Commission voted 4-1 for this project after talking about height for over an hour. And part of the recognition was there's a 76-foot building right next door. And so there's a fairly de minimis increase from the adjacent building to this building. And with the hole in the middle of the building, the relief that that provides to the street made this work at that location. So at every level until this point, and obviously you're going to reach your own independent conclusion, height has been assessed, and this has been found to be appropriate and more than appropriate, dynamic and interesting. With respect to the unit mix, this project has been in the queue for so long that we have been designed this project for some time consistent with the council's priority processing criteria. So that, as you recall, required no more than 20% studios, at least 20% two bedrooms, and at least 10% three bedrooms. So this project does have a balanced unit mix. It absolutely does, consistent with the dictates that you gave to these projects some time ago. So with all that said, and finally, with respect to open space, we conform to the draft DSP open space requirements, including the very high and rigorous mandatory ground floor open space requirements. Other downtown projects that have come before you, I don't believe, have hit that mark. This project does. So again, we urge an aye vote on this project. Given the design, the benefits, sustainability, and TDM, we think it's a project that merits approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I know we're going to have some questions for staff. Do we have any questions for the applicant? I don't see any. So, Councilmember Winter, you had indicated you had a question for staff.
Yeah, I actually have several. And first of all, and I relayed some of this to staff earlier today, I hope that going forward, when we look at these housing projects, we can do what the public suggested is appropriate, and I believe is appropriate, is instead of evaluating each individual project ad hoc, that we start looking more comprehensively at our long-range planning and evaluate how a project like this contributes to the housing production that we have envisioned in the loose and in the housing element, so that we know what we're getting out of this that helps us achieve those goals that we've espoused through that public process. I regret that it did not ask, and I think with going forward we should do this, is that we should also look at, since the adoption of loose, the types, the unit mix we've been getting, and have a more comprehensive look at how we're getting the unit mix we'd like going forward, so that we have some metrics to evaluate what we've done since the adoption of the loose and a way to analyze what we're doing going forward. But I do hope that we at least have tonight, I'm asking staff, what sort of numbers does this particular project contribute towards our goals in the loose and the housing element?
I'll ask Jing and Russell to provide the numbers for you, but I just want to say that we will have that information going forward, and all the staff reports will have kind of a tally that tells the council and the public where we are in terms of the goals in the loose. So we'll make sure that's included.
That's great. Thank you.
Well, council, the matter is before us. If there are no further questions.
They're going to answer my question.
Okay.
Which is
I thought they were going to get back to you, but okay.
Thank you, Council. Since the loose was adopted, we've had 1,928 units have been completed, are under construction, or have been approved and have not obtained building permits. Obviously, certainly, as Mr. Martin indicated, we will include this in future staff reports. This project contains 64 units, and I think the project after this one contains another 100 units.
And how does the different affordability levels that are attained through this project fit in with the goals we have espoused in the housing element?
I think Jean Yao is going to help us with the housing.
So the housing element has a variety of goals. Certainly one of the key ones is the production of housing at different affordability levels. We looked at how this project compares to the allocated RHNA numbers, Regional Housing Needs Assessment, and also the quantified objective. So Santa Monica has a quantified objective of 1,371 units. That's per the most recently adopted housing elements. Based on the housing element, we have 871 units that have been completed or are under construction towards that quantified objective, leaving 500 units remaining to be achieved. So at the I can break them down just for levels for you. At the 30% AMI level, that's 25 units remaining. At the 50% AMI level, 108, 80% AMI, 114, 120% AMI, or moderate, 86, and then above moderate is 167. With this particular project, it's providing 14 affordable units. The breakdown is it 10 at 50% and 4 at 80%. So you can kind of do the math there as at how it contributes to the remaining quantified objectives. Yeah.
All right, thank you. And then the numbers that Mr. Bunham quoted about the number of housing projects approved since 2010 are completed since 2010. Some of those, a large number of those, include unit projects that were entitled prior to adoption of the loose and just didn't get their financing until after we got out of the Great Recession. Isn't that correct?
That's
So essentially,
correct.
since the adoption of the loose and under loose rules, we've had a smaller number of housing projects.
That's correct, yeah. Of that 1,928 number, I think is about 55% of them actually were entitled before the loose was adopted. As you indicated, yeah, for various reasons, they didn't proceed into construction until after that fact. And of that, there's a subset that were what we call regulated by the loose, so they were approved after the loose or were completed.
All right. Well, I'm glad to be here. We'll be getting the data in the future, so we have something to go against. And then I have a couple more questions. One of which is on this water issue, and I see Mr. Kubani's here, and I hate for him to sit through an entire meeting without having a chance to speak. So we heard the applicant's suggestion about an increase in new water usage out of this project. As you're well aware, soon you'll be coming to us with ideas about water neutrality out of new development.
Yes.
And we don't have those in place yet, so instead we're being proposed in the state this payment towards water conservation elsewhere. So first of all, do you concur with what the applicant's consultant told us about current water use versus future water use?
Yes,
the
I've
best
seen.
you can, given the short notice for this question.
Yeah, I've seen the applicant's numbers, and I do concur. I'm not able to absolutely verify them, but what he told you is the existing current base use and what they're proposing under the code, or they're having to meet or exceed 30% below the Cal Green standards. So it's a very rigorous requirement for water conservation. So around probably somewhere between 3,000 and 3,500 gallons per day increase for that property, which is a relatively minor increase for a building of that size. It's a very highly efficient building. It's not water neutral, but it's highly efficient.
Well, and in your estimation, given that they're being asked to pay $300,000 towards water conservation efforts elsewhere, is that sum sufficient to offset that increased water use?
I think it is. I was doing some calculations. Just if you were to purchase ultra high efficiency toilets and install them in another property with less efficient toilets, it would probably cost you about the same amount of money that they have contributed, yes.
And that would offset that increased water use?
Yes, it would. And that would permanently offset that increased water use.
Right. Great, thank you. And then question for planning staff about I think it's great that we're seeing that, along with an ambitious AVR target for the commercial component of 2.2, that we're going to, I think this is the first time we're actually writing in these DAs some sort of non-compliance penalty, isn't that correct? In the past, there's sort of been goals, and then if you don't
That's
them,
correct,
then-
right. We had put this into the new TDM ordinance. However, the applicability of that is a little different because it applies to sort of regular non-negotiated projects, so it needs a nexus study and a development agreement. That's not the case, so we were able to really push the envelope here and require the penalty.
And so what's an example of what sort of penalty would be imposed in non-compliance? What if the project meets into 1.8 AVR instead of a 2.2 AVR? What do they have to pay? Is it significant enough of a penalty to motivate change, or is it just something that gets paid out of the project's petty cash account?
In terms of the penalty that would be paid, it's really going to vary significantly depending on the number of employees on the site. For this particular project, you're looking at about 6,000 square feet of commercial. So, theoretically, they could divide that into multiple tenant spaces. It's certainly not unusual to see smaller cafes. They might have 5 to 10 employees. If something takes up the whole space, maybe looking at a higher number. So, we could look at some hypotheticals. I think that, with an average, just for example, of maybe like 20 employees in the project or something like that, you're looking at a few $1,000s in a penalty. The way the calculation works is it converts the AVR to daily trips, essentially, and then we sort of extract a penalty from there. It's based on a $5 plus the average daily parking rate, which has to be at least $8 a day, could be higher. When we set up this penalty, the idea was to make it enough so that they're aware, that there has been noncompliance, and there's a remedy to modify the plan and a requirement, a time period requirement for those changes to be implemented. We weren't aiming to necessarily be punitive, I guess, in that regard. It was to have the penalty, but also encourage working with the city to effectuate the change in order to achieve the target AVR. That's the general approach that was taken in the DA.
Okay, thank you. And I got two more questions. The Planning Commission has asked for languages in the DA about the ground floor retail being active neighborhood serving uses. So I understand that means no office, something that actually draws people in off the street. Is that correct?
That's right, yes. Uses that encourage walk-in clientele, interesting activity at the street level.
Have we ever explored in DAs like this requiring that the ground floor commercial be either locally owned and or non-formula retail? So that we get some interesting pedestrian experiences rather than just walking by a CVS and a Starbucks?
That's certainly something that could be considered. It's not written that way right now. The way it's written right now, staff would look to the new zoning ordinance update, which had this issue of what's an active use vetted. There's a specific definition in there and a sort of categories of uses that would meet that criteria. And I believe, did Barry want to speak to that? No. on the non-formula retail provision.
Yeah, I just wanted to address the formula retail. As you know, that formula retail restrictions have been adopted by some cities, a handful of cities in California. Malibu is the most recent example that did that probably now over a year ago. There's not a whole lot of case law about the appropriateness of that. There have been challenges to that based on the Commerce Clause of the federal Constitution. The Malibu case, I think, is currently in litigation, but there's not a whole lot of case law locally in the local district court or the Ninth Circuit. The ordinances that have regulated based on formula have relied on the city's intent to preserve local character, the local ambiance, and it's been based on an extensive record. And so this issue came up actually during the course of the zoning ordinance update. The Planning Commission considered it, and it was our advice then, would continue to be the advice, that be done as a kind of standalone project so that kind of record could be developed. And that's what we recommend here. I note that in this development agreement, the uses that they may seek to put in, the non-residential uses, are those uses based on the zoning ordinance in effect at the time that they seek to establish those uses. So I think given that provision, were we to provide for such regulation in some future zoning ordinance provision, I think they would be subject to it.
But don't we have a certain amount of latitude in a development agreement to go beyond anything that's governed by case law? Can't we?
We certainly have much more latitude.
I mean, we can say everything has to be, the cell has to be pink. I mean, right? I mean,
well,
all right, that's a stretch.
That's a stretch.
The Commerce Clause always applies. You don't get out from under the U.S. Constitution in a contract negotiation.
Okay.
Though we're not sure that it does apply. That's the claim that's being made. So the law is kind of uncertain at the moment.
I understand the concern about ending up at the 22nd Santa Monica Starbucks location. But I don't think we've done the work on defining what is formula retail that would be required to add it in at this point tonight. I think the advice we're getting from Attorney Rosenbaum is that we need to do some work on that if we want to make that a requirement in the future, which I think might be an interesting idea to pursue, but we may not be ready to do it on this project tonight, unless you have a specific definition you've written up that you
I don't, it's sort of, I know it when I see it. That's but I'm not prepared to be the arbiter on that. I just have one last question. So there's in the DA, there's a very laudable rental marketing priority to the terms that the priority for tenancies should be given to not only employees directly in the immediate area, but throughout the city, and also first responders, teachers, etc. It's my recollection that when we did the 2nd Street DA for that Century West project, while the bandwidth of who the marketing priority would be addressed to was small, or it was just downtown employees, we did put in terms saying that there would be a 90-day window where they would market only to those priority prospective tenants, and I'm just wondering whether we could apply that same 90-day window to this broader spectrum of prospective tenants. It's currently prescribed in the development agreement.
Yeah, I guess we could let the applicant, but I don't see why that would be a problem.
Is that okay with the council? We let the applicant come back and answer that? Seeing no objection. Mr. Rand?
You are correct, Councilman. That provision was in the Second Street DA. Happy to include it here as well.
Wonderful answer. Thank you.
And continuing with questions for staff, Councilmember Davis.
Well, the good news is that Councilmember Winter asked a number of my questions. But Mr. Krupani, could you come back up? Because I just have a couple of follow-up questions. The water conservation program contribution is something we haven't seen before. And in answer to one of Councilmember Winter's questions, you pointed out, for example, we could use that money to purchase low-flow fixtures. I'm just curious, for like what buildings would we be purchasing low-flow fixtures? Are those for other private buildings? Are they for public buildings? I'm just wondering if we have this fund for water conservation programs, how would that work, and what are some other uses we might make of it?
Well, this is not intended to be an ongoing fund. This was specifically negotiated as part of this development agreement. The reason that came about is originally we were looking at potentially some type of a requirement for reuse of gray water within the building for toilet flushing and things like that. And that is a very new thing that hasn't been tried out commercially very successfully within the state yet. So rather than require the developer to do something that was essentially experimental, the agreement was that they would provide funding to the city, and we could either do something like that on one of our own buildings and or provide funding to another building that would be willing to try this. So basically it's working on a new cutting edge water conservation technology was the intent of that. But for your question, we are and will be bringing back to you the water neutrality ordinance on, or a discussion of that on November 24th, and we will be proposing that future water demand be offset elsewhere in the city. The types of buildings that we would recommend for that are there's quite a large stock of older buildings that may have 1.6 gallon per flush toilets in them. The majority of them do right now. There are much more efficient toilets now that can save 20% off the bat. So it's very easy to calculate a permanent water demand reduction, requiring a developer to go in and retrofit, 400 or 500 toilets could offset the demand from their project. So that's what we would be looking at.
So it would work sort of like the current carbon credits programs you can buy, where if you're feeling guilty about flying across the country, you can buy carbon offsets that go into alternative energy, that sort of thing. The idea being that it may be unavoidable that you have a net increase, in this case, in your use of water, but you can offset that with by contributing to a fund that then reduces water usage somewhere else throughout the city.
Yes, and contributing to a fund is one way to do it. Directly doing the installation and completing those installations is another way to require it. We've looked at a number of cities that have done water neutrality ordinances, and there have been a variety of different ways that they've done that. The ones that have collected a pot of money, it's more difficult to directly account for gallons conserved in those things if the money can be used for different things. But some cities, including Morro Bay and Napa, have actually required developers to do offsets in other parts of the community to actually complete the work and demonstrate that the water savings has been achieved before they can build their project.
Okay, great, thank you. And then I think I have a question for, I guess it's planning staff, about the parking, because it is going to be unbundled parking. So I'm just curious, and maybe this is premature, but how's that going to work? Because we have a residential building, we also have a retail component. Are the residential and the retail parking going to be separate still, but just unbundled, or how's that going to work?
Thank you, Council. Yes, so the parking for commercial and residential will both be unbundled. So you, as a resident or a commercial tenant, would lease parking separate from your tenant lease.
So, for example, but there's also additional parking spaces that are, for lack of a better term, excess parking spaces that could be used by the public, I'm gathering. Is that right?
That's correct. If some of the spaces are not leased, they would otherwise be available.
So, for example, will there be different entrances for parking for residential and business?
No. In go back to the floor plan. Here there is one driveway entrance off of the first level of the subterranean garage is typically for the commercial uses. The subterranean floors below that are for residential uses.
Okay, so presumably someone who said, I want to park in downtown, but might not even be necessarily patronizing the businesses in that building could pull in there and park. They just have to pay whatever the daily fee is. Is that right?
That would be, yes, that's correct.
So, for example, someone wanted to use the expo, they could drive down there, pay the daily fee, and walk to expo since it's so close.
Certainly.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Let me follow up on that before we go to Mayor Pro Tem Vasquez. A member of the public expressed concern that people in this building would not pay for the parking in the building, but therefore be parking on the street or in the parking structures. Now, it won't be possible to get preferential parking permits for this building because all the frontage around there is commercial. There is no preferential parking. I would assume that parking on the street paying the meter or parking in one of our parking structures paying the fee is going to be more expensive than renting a space right where your apartment is. So that really shouldn't be an issue with this unbundled parking. Is that staff's understanding of how that'll work?
We agree with that statement. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Vasquez.
Mine's a question back to the water. I didn't want to say water boy, but we were actually the answer to most of the questions, but one of them I was curious because some of the small businesses have been asking me, especially on Pico Boulevard, that I know when we move forward with this water conservation, we're using a baseline that goes back what was it, about 3 or 4 years, or maybe even further back, or 2 years back.
Yeah.
What happens in a project like this that obviously has no baseline because it's new?
That's one of the things that we're working out, trying to come up with a calculation that's a fair baseline use and a fair requirement. We are able to calculate the actual water use. So the figure that we gave
based on what? Similar projects? Is that what you're basing?
No.
Or just
the existing water use at that site right now. We know the actual water use. Because we're the water utility, so we know the actual amount of water that's been used there. And then we're looking at coming up with a calculation, and we'll present that to you for estimated water use based on the proposed development. So looking at the number of fixtures that are in there and what the water use would be for each of those fixtures, and then estimates based on the number of people occupying that unit. We have a ability to come up with a very good estimate of what the water demand would be for that project. And then we could subtract the existing water use from the estimated future water use, and that'll give us the amount that we would require them to offset.
Okay, thanks.
So with that, Council, it appears that our questions have been answered. We're being asked to approve a development agreement and introduce for first reading the affecting ordinance, which we have in our packet. Who would like to initiate discussion or make a motion? It could be a long night if nobody does. Councilmember Winter.
I'll initiate discussion on one thing. I personally am not really happy with the notion the Planning Commission's espoused in its condition number 8 that this project should be able to come back for yet another layer of discretionary review to add another story should the DSPs going forward allow that. I just feel like it's been at it 3.5 years. You only get so many bites at the apple, but I'm not really enthusiastic about the idea of another hearing that would take up additional staff time and resources. And I'm generally in favor of this project. I'm not in favor of allowing them the option to come back yet again. I think you either come before us before we adopt the DSP and take your shot at what we're able to give you under those circumstances, or you wait until after the adoption of DSP and you come back with an application at that point. But I just don't feel, I feel like we're extending, if we pursued this idea, would it be extending sort of the latitude that we wouldn't extend to a resident who came in and got an over-the-counter permit to do something and said, well, but I'd like to be able to come back and make these changes later. You get one crack at it. So I'm not in favor of that condition. That's started a discussion.
Well, I personally agree, and I think what you should do is hold that in abeyance as an amendment to whatever motion ends up getting made. Councilmember Davis.
Well, a couple of things. I want to start off by saying that we did hear some sentiments that we should hold off on this project until the downtown specific plan was adopted. And my concern is, although I appreciate, and we'll be talking about this later on this evening, that staff has set a goal of adopting the downtown specific plan by June of 2016. The fact of the matter is that we're 10 months into 2015 and we haven't approved a single unit of housing. And if we wait until June of 2016 to start approving housing, we're going to be so far behind the curve in terms of not only the housing that, has been, for lack of a better term, suggested to us by our RENA numbers, but really the housing we know we need to build, because just regionally, we have a housing shortage. We have a housing shortage of affordable housing. We have a shortage of what you might call workforce or market rate housing. And the longer we put off approving projects that include housing, the further and further behind that curve we're going to get. So I think that it's important for us to move forward with these sorts of projects, which are essentially housing projects with ground floor retail. The downtown specific plan will be discussed, and we'll have that discussion. But if in fact we like these projects, and I personally like this project, then I think just saying you have to arbitrarily wait until June of 2016 or perhaps sometime thereafter to go forward and bring this back is inappropriate. I guess I did have a question. Councilmember Winter's statements gave me pause. Initially, I didn't have a lot of heartburn about coming back for an additional floor because of Mr. Falonis' representations that it wouldn't change the envelope of the building or the appearance of the building, because I think it's the appearance of the building that makes this an attractive project. I mean, aside from the fact that it is a housing project, it isn't the normal box with some fenestration and maybe some protrusions. I like the big open space. I really like the landscape achieved by the gardens. I think that's a very unique way to achieve a sense of some greenery and beyond the sort of typical plants and planters kind of thing. So I think that makes it really interesting. I really appreciate the idea of gardens with edible plants. Not edible, the plants may not be edible, the fruits and vegetables on the plants may be edible. Because I do think that as we move into an era where we have persistent drought, but also where, whether we like it or not, millions of people are moving to this area. And so being able to make access to plants that generate fresh vegetables and fruits, I think is really exciting to someone who doesn't even maybe go to the farmer's market, but just goes to the roof. That's really great. I didn't have a lot of heartburn because of the building envelope, but it did, as Councilmember Winterer was speaking, give me a little bit of pause. And the reason that I was concerned is that if we were to approve this project tonight, I don't want it to become a political football when we are talking about the downtown specific plan. Because if we grant this provision in this agreement, then other people in downtown may want a similar provision. And all of a sudden, our ability to have, for lack of a better term, a rational and cohesive discussion about what should be in the downtown plan may be affected by the fact that people think it will open the floodgates to putting an additional floor here or there on numerous projects, maybe not just this one. So I think that's an interesting concept about disallowing that planning commission provision. But I do want to say that I'm very much in favor of this project. I'm in favor of the fact that it is housing. It does have, I believe, an appropriate unit mix. It does have a predominance of 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms, which gives people, whether they're students or singles, the opportunity to share 3 bedrooms or live on their own in a 1-bedroom. And I think it's got a good mix of affordable housing. So I am generally in favor of the project. But I do take what Councilmember Winter said to heart about that one particular provision and think that maybe it opens up a Pandora's box that we don't want to open.
Is that a motion?
Well, that sounded like you were explaining why you were going to make a motion. Is there a motion attached to those sentiments?
Sure. I would move that we, I just didn't want to step on anyone's toes. I was trying to be polite. I would move that we adopt the staff recommendation and approve development agreement 12 DEV-003 and introduce for first reading the ordinance adopting the development agreement with the exception of removing the provision that allows for the planning director to approve an additional story of height. Is that sufficiently clear?
Yes, and I think it's always better to actually to get a motion on the floor, because then we know exactly what we're focused on. Is there a second for that motion?
Second.
Okay, so I think there was a second from Councilmember O'Day. Okay, so it's a motion by Councilmember Davis, seconded by Councilmember O'Day, and Councilmember O'Day, you are next in the queue.
I am.
Well, you were. If the second says it all, I'm welcome to accept
Well, these
that.
two council members ahead of me did address many of the questions or topics that I wanted to cover. I would just add on this issue related to the number of stories in the building that I agree with both previous council members as I seconded the motion. I disagreed with Councilmember Winder. I said a resident could come back and submit a new permit application to get a new permit for a home that they're building, and similarly this applicant could submit a new DA application to correct for this issue as well, right? So I think we had so anyway, that's all.
Councilmember Winterer.
Yeah, just two things. First of all, to clarify on the motion, I believe what the condition regarding this 7-story was that there would be a discretionary process. You mentioned the planning director being able to approve it. I think my understanding would have been, if it's discretionary, as it says in the staff report, it would have been at least a planning commission hearing, correct? Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that's fine.
wanted-
I just misspoke.
Either way, okay. And then I would want to propose a friendly amendment, which is that to the rental marketing priorities, we add that 90-day window in which they only market towards those priority prospective tenants. That's right. Which would seem amenable to both staff and the applicant. So.
That is friendly to the maker. Is it friendly to the seconder?
Yes.
It is. So that'll be incorporated into the motion. Does the city attorney want to comment on that specifically?
So I just wanted to confirm where the motion is. So there's two elements. The first, as to the point you just made. So that's in would be added to section 2.7.8, which is on page 25 of the DA. And so the language which I think you are proposing would say that the developer shall market these residential units to the employees in the foregoing categories for a period of 90 days when these units are initially offered from rent. That's the language.
Exclusively to those.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the other component is to strike the additional stories in residential units section, which is 2.4.7 of the DA.
Councilmember Winter, with the adoption of that, are you done?
I am indeed. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Vasquez.
Yes, I was just going to make my comments on this particular project. I mean, as I was looking through the unit mix, while it doesn't have as many 3-bedrooms as I'd like to see, I noticed they reduced them but then added more 2-bedroom units. So it's not the ideal trade-off, but I'm comfortable with it moving forward, though.
And I'll just say that parking is always an issue on any project in the city. And back when we adopted the zoning code, the original recommendation had been to allow unbundled parking anywhere, and I opposed that and succeeded in convincing the majority of the council that unbundled parking should be allowed and perhaps encouraged, but shouldn't be mandatory everywhere. My thinking being that there are some places in the city where unbundled parking, which allows a renter not to have to pay for a parking space that she or he may never use because she or he doesn't drive, would actually be a good thing. This, I think, is exactly the kind of place where unbundled parking makes sense. I'd be hesitant on a boulevard where the residents of the building might then park in the adjacent residential neighborhood where parking is already scarce, but this is in the heart of downtown. There's no preferential parking nearby. It would be more expensive to buy parking somewhere else than to park in your own building if you do decide to have a car. And this is going to be within easy walking distance of the Expo line. So if we're moving toward a multimodal society, this is the place where unbundled parking does make sense. And I would still have concerns about it in other places, but I don't feel that way about this particular site. Councilmember Winter, you've jumped in.
I was just going to elaborate, and staff can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe downtown there's no parking between the hours of 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. for street sweeping, so you can't park on the streets.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
So with that, Council, I think we're ready for a roll call vote.
Mayor Pro Tem Vasquez.
Yes.
Councilmember Davis.
Yes.
Councilmember Himmelrich is not present. Councilmember Winter.
Yes.
Councilmember O'Day.
Yes.
Councilmember O'Connor.
Yes.
And Mayor McCune.
Yes, so that passes unanimously, 6-0, with 6 council members present, and Councilmember Himmelrich lured away by the lights of New York tonight. And we'll move on now to 7C.
Item 7C, introduction and first reading of an ordinance adopting Development Agreement 12 DEV 017 to allow a 5-story, 102,500 square foot mixed-use project consisting of 100 residential units, 13,800 square feet of ground floor commercial space, and 232 spaces within a 3-level subterranean parking garage at 1560 Lincoln Boulevard, Denny's. And there are 6 requests to speak.
And I won't have to explain the process a second time, because we just did this, a very similar development agreement process, and we'll start with the staff report.
Thank you. Good evening, Council. Steve Mizukami from City Planning. The next item on tonight's agenda is a mixed-use housing development agreement at the property located at 1560 Lincoln Boulevard. The site is located in the mixed-use boulevard zoning and Lucian. The property is also included in the draft downtown specific plan boundaries as a sub-area of the DSP. The site is located on the northwest corner of Lincoln and Colorado with a total lot size of 37,500 square feet, and is currently developed with a 1-story commercial building occupied by Denny's Restaurant. The building would be 5 stories, 60 feet in height, with a 2.73 FAR, and consists of 100 residential units with a unit composition of 7 studio, 39 1-bedroom, 44 2-bedroom, and 10 3-bedroom units. And ground floor commercial space would include about 13,800 square feet. Yeah, a 3-level subterranean garage would provide 232 parking spaces with 30 short-term bike parking spaces, along with 173 long-term bike spaces, as well as bike showers. And both the vehicle and bike parking would be compliant with the draft DSP. The ground floor setback ranges from between 20 feet and 34 feet at the street corner, with expanded sidewalks greater than the draft DSP standards. Open space is 67% of the lot provided throughout the project, including just over 20% on the ground floor, including the public paseo connecting Lincoln Boulevard to the rear alley. The podium level courtyard would include approximately 3,000 square feet for resident use and over 9,000 square feet of open space on the roof decks, including a pool and spa and solar trellises, and the garage access is provided by the 7th Court alley. The interior courtyard is approximately 41 feet in width, with additional spacing created by the paseo, and single loaded corridors are provided for units along the west side of the courtyard on each level. The project's design includes openings in both building elevations that reduce the overall building length and massing, resulting in the paseo that's facing off of the Lincoln elevation and the elevated podium level that faces Colorado. The building includes cantilevered upper floors and covered ground floor seating facing both streets. Now, overall, the project has been designed according to the draft DSP standards and includes minor variations to certain draft provisions as outlined in the staff report. Although the project results in variations to underlying zoning standards, the project is consistent with the loose. Now, the Planning Commission held 2 float-up reviews on this project before their formal review on July 22nd, where the Commission recommended approval of the DA based on the findings in the staff report, and had comments that the project maximize the solar energy on the roof, include active commercial uses on the ground floor, and that the ARB have additional flexibility during their review of the project, and that they pay particular attention to the solar protection along the west elevation. And the developer has agreed to all of the Planning Commission's recommendations. The following community benefits have been negotiated for the project, which would provide 20% affordable units consisting of 10 1-bedroom and 5 2-bedroom units affordable to 50% income households, and 5 2-bedroom units affordable to 80% income households, with a bedroom factor of 1.5, which is equal to the project's bedroom factor, and consistent with the criteria established for Tier 2 projects in the updated zoning ordinance. Physical improvements include expanded sidewalks in the Paseo, including dedicated public open space during certain hours to remain unobstructed. Enhanced impact fees and contributions in the following areas, including enhanced TIF, parks and recs, and affordable linkage, childcare contributions, also contributions to support the establishment of a TMA, Big Blue Bus improvements, and for historic preservation and water conservation programs, for a total amount of $2.3 million in contributions. The TDM plan includes a variety of measures, including AVR target and a 100% transportation allowance. Sustainability elements would include the following. The project would be designed to achieve a LEED Platinum certification. Roof-mounted solar would be maximized and provide energy for both the pool and common areas. And the building would be designed to use 15% less energy than required by the California Energy Code. Non-potable water sources would be used for landscape irrigation, and the project would commit to a 30% water reduction below the Cal Green baseline for interior water usage. A bioswale would capture and treat stormwater runoff from Lincoln Boulevard. EV charging stations would be provided, and the project would provide 20 parking spaces reserved for city use. One correction that staff would like to point out is on page 12 of the development agreement, that the kitchen sink faucets would be provided at a 1.5 gallons per minute and not the 2.2 gallons as stated in the development agreement. On-site community meeting space is provided, as well as a local hiring provision for construction and permanent employment. And finally, as a significant project feature, the project would provide on-site public art with the approval process consistent with the Cultural Arts Ordinance. Based on the economic analysis provided by Kaiser Marston and Associates, the value enhancement above a Tier 1 project would be $2.2 million, and the project would result in revenue of approximately $18,600 per year to the city's general fund, and the project is CEQA exempt as an infill housing project. Staff recommends that Council approve the project and introduce for first reading, adopting the development agreement based on the findings provided in the staff report. The staff is available for any questions.
So, Council, this is obviously a project raises many we've already asked about before, but are there any questions for staff on this one at this point? Councilmember Davis.
Thank you for the report. I just have, so the Paseo goes all the way through to 7th Court, as I understand it. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And I actually walked that 7th Court, and there's actually a picture of it in the materials. It's not what I would call an attractive space. Is there some plan either at the city level or talking to the developer about maybe improving the ambiance in the alley? Because it's nice to have the pass-through, but if it passes through to a big ugly brick wall with people hanging around out there in the back sort of thing. I mean, I'm just curious, because I think the Paseo is a great idea, but and I know there's a loading zone in the back, a passenger loading zone, so presumably people who want to be dropped off will be dropped off in the alley. But I'm just wondering, you walk through this, at least hopefully beautiful Paseo, and you get dumped off in a pretty dumpy looking alley. I'm just curious about that.
Well, aside from, either repaving or something of the alley, we did consider in terms of trying to get some additional setback along that alley side. So we do have a 5-foot setback that the building is set back in this, in this area here, and kind of consistent with your thought about the flow of pedestrian circulation in this area. So the alley is, I believe it terminates in this area here. So the alley would really just be serving the project here and two housing projects, I believe, on the west side here. But at any rate, so we did look for trying to get some additional spacing so that pedestrians can kind of flow into that area.
Well, and when I was looking at the 7th Court, I seen that 3 times quickly. In the materials, it looks, pun intended, pretty pedestrian. So I'm just wondering, is there a thought that maybe if we increase some landscaping back there or something to make that alley a little more pleasant to walk through? Because it really is very barren, and I know we can't control what's going on the other side of the alley, but would it be possible to maybe put some additional requirements for landscaping back there or something?
Yeah, I mean, I think it could be open to suggesting that perhaps maybe the ARB in their review of the project maybe look at ways to kind of soften up the elevation, particularly at the pedestrian level.
Okay, great, thank you.
Councilmember Winter.
If I read the staff report correctly, the project is not consistent with the draft DSP in terms of meeting the open space requirements and the ground floor commercial depth. Is that correct? And if so, could you elaborate?
Sure. So the requirement for the size of a project requires that 30% of the lot size be provided in open space, 20% of that to be provided on the ground floor. So the project does have that. It's slightly above 20% in terms of the amount of open space on the ground floor. But also there's also these additional provisions in the draft DSP that kind of talk about what counts and what shouldn't maybe count. Such, for example, whenever we have the expanded sidewalk beyond that minimum requirement should not go towards this requirement. But particularly for this one, there's a provision that talks about that the open to the sky area be at least a minimum of 21 feet. The project has cantilevered upper floors that are approximately about 18 to 19 feet in height. So the volume is there, the open space is there, but from a technical standpoint for this provision, it doesn't technically meet it by a few feet.
And so, obviously, there's been some back and forth between staff and the applicant on that issue that must have come up at the Planning Commission. So, why are we, staff report suggesting that we sort of not adhere to the draft DSP on that particular issue? Is there a reason for that?
Well, I think the discussion at the Planning Commission level is really to try to get the amount of square footage, which is the 20% on the ground floor. So, provided that it doesn't have the 21 feet in height, nonetheless, it's still open space that has some considerable volume. So, I think the concern was really to try to get the amount of 20% as open space on the ground floor.
And then what about the depth of the commercial frontage? The DSP says it's going to be at least 75 feet, is that correct? Or the draft
for this
DSP?
one, yeah, I think for this one it's an average of 50 feet in depth. So just how they have it designed, some areas do have 50 feet in depth, some areas don't, but it is an average in terms of trying to get the appropriate depth. For this project, it isn't technically meeting that average all the way through.
I suppose, though, one could argue that in that case, I mean, I've seen this on Main Street at the CCSM project there, which has shall commercial frontage. You actually, since that at least, if you're renting at market rate per square foot and you have a smaller footprint, it's actually more amenable to smaller locally owned businesses to be able to rent those smaller spaces. Do you think that's a fair analysis of what might potentially happen here?
Yeah, and then also there's flexibility in terms of the shape of these tenant spaces. So now these are kind of drawn off for some potential tenant spaces, but you do have flexibility in terms of how wide these spaces could be as well. So you're not limited to, like, let's say a parcel that's 50 feet in width where you really only have a certain width, therefore we're going to try to achieve a appropriate depth. But this property, as wide it is on either side, you can kind of divide it up so you do have some flexibility to try to get a reasonable tenant space.
All right, thank you very much.
Seeing no further questions from other council members, I'll jump in with one for staff because there was something in this project I didn't see as an issue in the other project. There was something on one of your slides about the marketing of the lofts to artists, I think local artists. And can you explain to us how that would work? Because we've had a real problem getting artists into space in our city, and we know that housing has become much more difficult for artists. I'm very interested in how we would do this.
Sure. So the requirement would be for kind of these ground floor level areas here. They are lofts. They do have some mezzanines in the space. Was that there would be a provision that we outreach and try to alert the community of these availability for the lofts.
And that's been agreed to by the applicant at this point?
Correct.
Okay, great. That concludes our questions for staff. Thank you very much. We're going to move on through the process, and this may seem like deja vu, but with a 10-minute presentation on behalf of the applicant, our next speaker is Dave Rand. Mr. Rand, last time you wanted to split it 7-3, and then it turned out to be 8-2. What's your best guess this time?
Given we have a less verbose architect this time, we are going to go...
Mr. Falonis has left the building, so he saves things.
Let's call it 3 minutes for rebuttal.
So we'll give you 7 minutes right now. If the clerk will start the clock, welcome.
Thank you. For the record, Dave Rand, Armbruster Goldsmith Delvac, representing the applicant, NMS Properties. This project, council, had a very different evolution than the one that you just approved. The Fifth Street project came out of the box with a lot of fanfare and was embraced from a design standpoint by the ARB, the staff, and the commission. Denny's has gone through a few iterations. The first project that we brought to the commission and to the ARB was found wanting on several design fronts. It had a very long, unrelenting, not my word, the Planning Commission's word, facade along Lincoln Boulevard. To them, it lacked sufficient open space. It had a dynamic but yet controversial art piece on the corner. And the project before you, which received unanimous approval by the Planning Commission, is really a product of your process and of input from the ARB and the Commission on the type of project that they wanted to see at this important corner. And we believe the design in front of you meets the key objectives. It breaks up the massing. It allows for more open space, and Councilman Winter, some of that open space is cantilevered, but it does satisfy the draft DSP 20% of the ground floor open space requirement. It opens the building up, 5,000 square feet of open space, and we think it will be a dynamic frontage along the Lincoln, Colorado corner. With respect to community benefits, the project has more units, but it's smaller in envelope. It reaches only 60 feet in height, so we did not have the robust height debate that we had on the last one. But the project's community benefits are commensurate with the last. 20% affordable housing, 15% of that deed restricted for very low income residents, 5% low income, no moderate units in this project whatsoever, $9 million in fees for all sorts of city priorities, a community room, public parking space for the city, water conservation measures that actually exceed the previous project. Because we have more landscaping, this is a larger site, this project will be mandated to landscape and irrigate with non-potable water. So this will be a gray water landscaping project, which is unique and different. And not to delve into the net neutral discussion, but in crunching the numbers about existing usage at the Denny's restaurant, which is a 24/7 restaurant operating all the time and fairly busy, the numbers actually came out that it's a break even. The existing water use is about equal to the expected water usage of this project with all of the rigorous sustainability requirements put into effect, notwithstanding the fact that we still have a $300,000 off-site sustainability fund payment provided as part of this development agreement. So you have a project before you that has been thoroughly vetted from a design standpoint, received unanimous approval at the commission, and includes, again, the community benefits package that is not only adequate, but a new standard for the city of Santa Monica. So with that, I'll hand it over to our brief architect, Wade Killer.
You're less verbose architect.
I am the issue here. Hello, I am Wade Killefer, Flamang Architects, and with me today is Jesse Ossinger, who did all this great design that we will be showing. As Dave said, we've been working on the site for almost 3 years, and we've changed and refined our scheme in response to ARB and Planning Commission comments. Above you before are two different schemes, and here we are today. We're now proposing to cut the building up into 3 distinct masses with 40-foot wide east-west paseo at the ground floor and a 40-foot wide north-south courtyard on the second floor connected above by bridges. The paseo breaks up the long Lincoln facade and moves through the site from Lincoln to the alley, as was said before, we're also improving the alley with a 5-foot wide sidewalk. So this Paseo is not so much a way to get from Lincoln to the 7th Court. It's a way to bring traffic down into those artist lofts and down into the lobby and kind of invigorate the ground floor plane. Besides providing relief along Lincoln, the Paseo also extends the commercial pedestrian realm into the middle of the site and brings traffic to the residential lobby and the lived-work lofts. In order to maintain an open pedestrian feeling at the ground floor, we're recessing the building 22 feet to 34 feet back from the curbs. That's where we get our open space requirement. And we're squashed to 50 feet, so that's why we have an 18-foot first floor instead of a 20-foot first floor. And we have a 6-foot wide parkway bioswale there along Lincoln, which is a provides pedestrian safety as well. On the second floor level, we have a 40-foot wide north to south courtyard, which you can look down into the Paseo and over into Colorado Avenue, creating visual connections across and through the site. The Paseo creates an east-west opening to allow for ocean breezes to come through the site. 50 of our 100 units get cross-ventilation by having 2 facades open. We believe this project has benefited greatly from the comments we've received, and we're very pleased with the resulting scheme. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Kilfer or Mr. Rand, before we have questions from the council for the applicant, could one of you bring us back to the slide that was called corner on the, now back. There we go, stop right there. Before we go any further, I just want to point out this is truly a historic moment, because in that rendering, for the very first time, out in the lower left, we are for the first time seeing a rendering that includes the new light rail.
That's actually a picture
Santa
that we
Monica.
took. It was testing it.
It's moving so fast, I can tell. So this is the first time we've ever seen a project along the new light rail line that includes in its rendering a picture of the light rail. So let this moment be marked. October 13th, 2015. Council members, any questions for the applicant? Seeing no questions, thank you very much. We will now open the public hearing on item 7C, and I'll call 3 people at a time in hopes they can stand and be ready to speak. The first will be people of California, followed by Nancy Coleman and Ellen Brennan. And sir, you've asked for 1 minute on item 7C.
I have. As we saw with this last project, we're doing these one at a time. We're adding to our overall water demand in the city. And, you know, if you reduce everyone's water use down to a quarter of what it would have been, and then you bring in 5 times as many people, you know, obviously it's not going to work. You're adding more to the demand, and we're not going to have any more, you know, increases in our aquifers out here. They're not going to, you know, increase by 25% so we can keep growing at the rate you guys want to. What I see here is a vision for unlimited growth, economic and development, and of course that is the business model of cancer, and that is unfortunately what we seem to have in this council: cancer, eating the city from within. I also would point out that this is not a picture because there are posts, big poles blocking your view that should be there for the metro.
Our next speaker is Nancy Coleman.
Hi. I am truly concerned with this entire corner, the kitty corner of the Norms development, the kitty corner, and the rest of the development that is incremental down Lincoln Boulevard towards the 10. As you look at the picture that we now see before you, you may turn right if you're coming down Lincoln to go over to the court in order to get into the garages in the back. But you may not turn left as you come down Lincoln. You may not turn from that court when you come out. You may not turn left, you have to turn right. You're pushing more traffic into the downtown area. I am concerned because Lincoln, as it's now going to be, is going to have one lane in each direction. And the crossovers of Colorado will have one lane in each direction. And the crossovers by traffic of any sort may not use left-hand turns to go over the tracks. You may not at 7th, you may not at Lincoln. You know, you're going down to be able to make left-hand turns. Where are these people going to be able to get out of the neighborhood, out of the area in order to do it? And we're having numerous new buildings being built potentially across the street. So again, how is it that we're expecting, I understand that we don't expect a lot of people to have cars, but there's still going to be movement around there, and the movement and the discussion of the transportation isn't there. I would ask that the council consider something that they can do within their powers. I'm sorry. I mean, it's
I have a feeling that Councilmember Winter is going to ask you what that something
Yes.
might be.
What would that something be, briefly?
You have the authority to ask for a transportation plan, a city-based CEQA, since you're not asking for a CEQA for these individual buildings, but they're cumulative. The cumulative numbers add up. They add up on the east side of Lincoln, and they're going to add up on the west side of Lincoln. You have the ability to ask that you do the traffic study that you would otherwise have to do with CEQA.
Thank you. Next speaker is Ellen Brennan. And Ms. Brennan will be followed by Art Casillas and Andrew Hoyer. Ms. Brennan, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. This project offers no parking.
Ms. Brennan,
It
can you
includes
pull the
parking
microphone down to you a
spaces.
bit? Pull that microphone down toward you a bit. It was up for somebody taller.
That better?
Much better. Thank you.
This project offers no parking. It includes parking spaces, but they are all unbundled. From the commercial and from the residential, they're all unbundled. This means that residents and the commercial tenants' customers will have no parking provided. So it's likely that residents and commercial interests will be parking in existing lots, such as the Vaughn's parking lot on Lincoln, which local residents use regularly. Now, I suppose it's possible that tenants could buy parking from MSF at market rates, but it's not likely when there's an empty parking lot right next door that belongs to Vaughn's. The nearness to the expo line is no help. People riding the light rail will not likely live here. This project also doesn't comply with the mandated setbacks in the zoning that applies. The setbacks need to increase with each higher floor. This building doesn't do that. This project needs further work. As is, just say no.
Thank you. Next speaker is Art Casillas.
Good evening, Art Casillas. Devin's fighting words, beneficial to the community. In the first place, who asked you to sell out one of our most prestigious, beneficial, God-given benefits? Our seashore cannot be restored, rebuilt, nor reassembled. Once you've destroyed its artistic beauty, rich presence, but most of all its life-giving, saving, and fresh air resource. As of late, with all this hot air temperature, who would be stupid, crazy, and irresponsible enough to give away our sought the world over clean, clear, fresh, cool, fresh air benefits? You, Santa Monica City Council renters' rights, say you're allowing higher buildings in exchange for more supposed affordable housing units. But for gentrification, you're giving them to rich white folks coming from out of town, so that doesn't sound like diversity already. Sounds unconstitutional, not allowed in rich white areas, NIMBY. If it's affordable housing you want, you've known about President Obama's HUD Fair Housing Act since 2013, which gives you funding to include Mexicans, blacks, and Asians in your richer white neighborhoods to help us meet middle-class stature. Now again, how does building tall buildings creating walls that cut off clean air, oxygen, and trap smog and prevents temperature circulation benefit us. I think at election time, we need to elect specifically lifelong residents who appreciate what God has bestowed on us. Remember, Los Angeles buildings are going to cage us in from Centinela. You have been warned. Thank you.
Thank you. When I commented this might be like deja vu, I had no idea. Andrew Hoyer is next, followed by Zena Josephs, and then Jerry Rubin.
Good evening. My name is Andrew Hoyer. I'm president of Santa Monica Mid-City Neighbors. I actually had a lot of vitriolic comments for this project, but then I realized I was confused and I was thinking about Norm's, not Denny's, which brings up the point that you need to be very cautious about what you're approving in these locations, because right across the street, you've got 3 vacant properties. One of them is already going through Planning Commission at this point, and they're claiming that they don't have any plans for the other 2 lots. But you know that they do. They're going to see how the first one goes. So this one's the precursor to those 3. So within a few years, you're going to have 4 multi-unit apartment complexes on this corner. So you need to be very careful about what you put in, because the first time you agree to something for one, all the rest are going to want the same thing, and then you're going to have 2, 3, maybe 4 lawsuits on your hands because you gave it to one person, but you denied it to us. So my problem with this one is the same thing. 51% of the units in this building are 1-bedroom or studio apartments. The same ratio as the other ones, and the ratio, the norms, I think, is even more egregious. So this one's pretty decent, but just be careful, because whatever you approve for this one, that's what you're going to be wind up approving right across the street at Norms. I don't think I had really too many other comments. At least they broke up the retail space into a lot of smaller spaces. I think that's very important, as that provides more things instead of just one big CVS. Having several things like a dry cleaner and a few restaurants and a few other things means it'll be places for locals to eat. So overall, I don't have as many objections to this project. It's smaller than the 84-foot one that I spoke against earlier. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hoyer. Next is another neighborhood group chair, Zena Josephs of Sunset Park. Good evening.
Thank you, but I'm only speaking for myself tonight. I actually like the open space on the corner, and I like the design, but I have 3 questions about the project. Because it's exempt from CEQA, there has been no traffic study. Lincoln south of the freeway has about 50,000 daily car trips, so I imagine that Lincoln north of the freeway may be similar, and I'm wondering how many daily car trips this project will add. Secondly, with the eastern frontage along Lincoln, and this picture looks nothing like Lincoln Boulevard, which has many more lanes and many, many more cars, and the southern frontage on Colorado with the Expo line running until 1 a.m., I believe. Does this sound like a location where any of you on the council would like to live? Because what will the quality of life be like at this corner? Thirdly, regarding a comment on the previous agenda item about housing for Santa Monica College students, there are more than 30,000 students at the college, and as I recall, only about 5% of them are from Santa Monica. The college is spending $1.2 million on advertising this year to increase enrollment. As I recall, all 9 campuses of the LA Community College system have a total of only 110,000 students, with West LA College and Culver City with a campus nearly twice the size of Santa Monica College and only 10,000 students. We already house about 3,000 international students. I got an email from a dad in Sweden this year asking me where his daughter might live in my neighborhood. So I directed him to one of the college officials. So if students who live in LA choose to come to Santa Monica to college, that's fine, but are we obligated to provide housing for them when they might also attend LA City College, West LA, Trade Tech, Pierce, LA Valley College, etc.? Thank you.
Thank you. And wrapping up the public hearing on this item will be Jerry Rubin.
Well, thank you, Mayor McKeown, council members, Jerry Rubin, Santa Monica. Well, first of all, I want to praise the process. I think that's something to consider when we're thinking about these because it's gotten better over a long period of time, and that's commendable with all points of view and working with city staff. I think it's a really nice design. I don't think it's too tall. I think it's going to be beneficial for the city in general and for that corner. With all respect to Denny's, I remember tons of cars would be coming in there all day, afternoon, and evening, all the time for bacon and egg breakfast, and that's all well and good, but I think that what's going to be happening here is even going to provide more of a diverse benefit to the community and much more housing that's needed. Again, I'm hoping people will start thinking about getting out of their cars onto the light rail, onto the blue bus, bicycles, and it's our obligation to let people know the benefits of that. But I do think that this corner is benefiting very, very much from this project, and hopefully one across the street in the future as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rand, on behalf of the applicant, you had asked to save 3 minutes to rebut anything said by the public during the public hearing, and this is your time.
Thank you, Mayor. A couple of brief responses. First, with respect to parking, we believe we have hit the sweet spot for parking on this project and have right-sized the parking. The number of provided parking spaces actually fits right within the standards called for by the draft specific plan and the standards included in the new zoning ordinance, and we think are tailored appropriately to the site. And of course, that does include the 20 public parking spaces that will be reserved for the city. With respect to traffic, the project and the DA include all the same rigorous TDM requirements that you heard before in the previous project: AVR targets, penalties for noncompliance, fully subsidized transit passes for residents and employees that forego a car. I heard a comment that the project is non-compliant with the DSP step backs. The draft DSP includes upper level floor plate limitations, which our project actually complies with. We've studied that standard. Staff agrees. It's in your staff report that we are consistent with that provision. And finally, with respect to the cumulative development that potentially could occur along Lincoln Boulevard, yes, there are other pending projects, housing projects with ground floor commercial uses along Lincoln Boulevard. Last time I looked at the Luce and the Lincoln Corridor plan, that kind of was the idea, to redevelop and improve Lincoln Boulevard. I thought that was the goal of the city, and I think this project is a very good starting point for how you want to redevelop this important boulevard and improve upon it. And with respect again to the community benefits, I would just point out that Kaiser Marston, the city's economic consultant on this project, evaluated the entitlement, the value enhancement of what could be done from a Tier 1 base project to the Tier 3 project at $2.21 million. That's their estimate. And the reason that is lower than the previous project is because the standards are lower on Lincoln Boulevard in the mixed-use boulevard designation. So here we can only go up to 60 feet and 2.75 FAR, allowing less development rights. 2.2 million for the entitlement. What's the value of the community benefits with using the city's rather conservative estimate for evaluating affordable housing units? $8.8 million. That's a tremendous capture in terms of a benefit to the city across the board. And we encourage you to support this project and start the future redevelopment of Lincoln Boulevard off in the right way. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rand. So now we've heard from the applicant rebutting the public, and it's a chance now for the council to ask questions to the applicant or the staff. And the first who wants to do that is Councilmember Winterer.
Yeah, Mr. Rand, if you could come back, I just wanted to go through the motions on something. I'm assuming that, given your willingness,
I'll play along.
Well, I mean, you were amenable in the last one, so I assume you are on this one. But that regarding section 2.7.23, the local preference marketing plan, and this notion that we provide that exclusive 90-day window for the people designated as the prime tenants for this project.
Agreed.
All right, thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Vasquez.
Just a quick question on the commercial end on the ground floor. I'm assuming you're looking at some kind of a restaurant there?
Correct.
Is there any thought on, or any discussion with any group?
No, we don't have a tenant in mind necessarily, but definitely we think a restaurant, at least one restaurant, is appropriate for that location.
Thanks.
Well, Council, I see no further questions coming forth, so the matter is now before us. And again, what we're being asked to do is to approve the development agreement and adopt the ordinance that affects it. Councilmember Winter, you're first.
Yeah, so I had some questions for staff. Once again, I'd like to see Mr. Gubani flex his legs and get some exercise. Just want to confirm, my understanding from when I inquired is that the former use of Denny's on this site used 6,300 gallons per day, and this project would use 6,100 gallons per day. Is that jibe with your understanding?
That's about right, yes.
So actually, this project will use less water than the Denny's was using.
Yes, and the way we calculated the Denny's was a 5-year average from 2009 to 2013.
Okay, thank you. And then question for planning staff. We heard some concerns about the unit mix, but if I look at the numbers, 54% of the units will be either 2 or 3 bedrooms in this project. Is that correct? So more than half?
For 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, let's see here, 44 2 bedrooms and 10 3-bedroom units.
Yeah, so 54% 2 bedrooms and 3 bedrooms.
Right.
All right, thank you.
All right, Council, once again, it seems that we're out of questions and ready to discuss the matter. So who would like to begin discussion? Councilmember O'Day, you're poised. But Councilmember Davis beat you to it, you're right. Councilmember Davis.
Well, I view this project much as we viewed the last one. I appreciate the idea about, thinking comprehensively about the city, and I think that's why we spent 6 years adopting the loose and on countless numbers of meetings about the zoning ordinance. So I think we have been thinking holistically about what's been going on in the city. And I think, as Mr. Rand correctly pointed out, I don't think this was a controversial issue, that Lincoln is an underperforming street, and that if you were to drive down it at almost any point in time, you would see it's not a very pedestrian-friendly street, except for the people who are crowding into Bay Cities. You don't see a lot of people out on the street. A lot of the uses along the street are not pedestrian-friendly. I suppose we could argue about whether or not Denny's is a community amenity, but it's a chain restaurant with moons over Miami. So I think that this really is the beginning of taking Lincoln, and this is a transit-rich environment. And the question was asked, would any of us want to live there? I would. I think this is a great location. It's right on a lot of bus lines. It's right close to the light rail. People who live near light rail will find that it's not particularly noisy, particularly since this is not near a stop, so you won't hear a lot of the announcements that go on at a stop or have people gathering near a stop, but it's certainly within walking distance of a stop. So I think it's important to us that as we look at Lincoln and what we want it to be like over time, and that doesn't mean we want to take out mom and pop businesses like Bay Cities or some of the other things along there. But I think what we'll find is that by building housing along Lincoln, it will become a much more pedestrian active, I'm not using that word right, but it'll become much more active from a pedestrian perspective there. Whew. And I think that's really what we want to have happen there. This is going to widen the sidewalks. This is going to create interesting ground floor retail. I think Councilmember Winter's analysis is correct. These may be somewhat small commercial spaces, but that's going to mean that they're not going to be leased out to giant chain stores. You're not going to see a Gap probably go in there because they couldn't put all their merchandise in there. But this is going to be more local mom and pop type retail, some of which you already see along Lincoln. And so I would anticipate that perhaps some of the current mom and pop retail along Lincoln may want to move into this. You're probably not going to see the tile places move into here. But those tile places, while they perform a valuable function, are not very pleasant to walk by. They're not friendly to pedestrians. I think getting rid of these surface parking lots, a large surface parking lot attached to Denny's, as well as some of the other parcels along Lincoln, are really key. Do we want to be a city of strip malls, or do we want to be a city of walkers? The Surgeon General said that actually walking will improve all of our health, and I could certainly use that. So I am going to move that we approve development agreement 12 DEV 017 to allow the 5-story building here, and introduce for first reading an ordinance adopting development agreement 12 DEV 017 with the amendment proposed by Councilmember Winterer that we add the 90-day provision for reach out to local folks, including local artists, as I understand it, because this one has artist loft space as well as first responders, people who already work in the area. And I would also like to include a provision that we direct the Architectural Review Board to look specifically at the landscaping in the alley. I do think that there is a 5-foot setback, and that gives us an opportunity to create some interesting landscaping. I think we will find, because of that paseo, and this is a good thing, you may have people darting into that alley to get into the paseo rather than going around the corner. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but I think it calls out then to pay special attention to at least the portion of the alley that is engulfed by this project, and maybe that will encourage the people on the other side of the alley to step up their game as well.
So we have a motion.
Yes.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All right, so it's moved by Councilmember Davis, seconded by Councilmember O'Connor, and the next request to speak is from Mayor Pro Tem Vasquez.
You know, I was looking over at these numbers, and I think actually Councilman Winter just reaffirmed it, but unlike the other projects I know that I've looked at in the past of NMS that really produced a lot of small units, this one is actually, I guess it's 54%, which is like 54 units will actually be 2 and 3 bedrooms. Once again, I was looking to have a little bit more on the 3-bedroom side, but I guess by reducing the 3 bedrooms, they were able to increase the 2 bedrooms. So I will be supporting this as well. And for me, as I look at it, and I know somebody was making some comments about this corner, you know, this is where I think we need to start looking at housing all along this transit corridor area. You know, unlike some of these other areas that were, you know, people are trying to propose to build more housing or more commercial space, I think that's where you can write a little bit more of a traffic jam. Here, I think there's a real opportunity for a lot of the folks that actually move into these units to be carless. And I think that's something that we need to start supporting.
Thank you, Councilmember Winterer.
Yeah, I had pushed my button so that I could add my 90-day recommendation for the exclusive window on the the local preference marketing, and Councilmember Davis kindly added that into her motion already, so I just thought I'd reiterate for people to understand that the idea is there'll be a priority marketing to people who work nearby and in Santa Monica, and the extent that you're able to get those people who don't live in our city but work here to live here, there's a substantial traffic reduction consequence from that action. And in addition to marketing, having a marketing priority to people who work in the city, the marketing priority addresses public safety officials, people in the police and fire department, employees of the local hospitals and healthcare providers, employees of the school district, and as Councilmember Davis noted, the artists who obviously would be attracted to those loft space. So I think that's a very desirable outcome from this project, is that opportunity to house those people.
Councilmember Davis.
I just want to briefly point out on the unit mix, not only is more than 50% of the units 2-bedroom or above, but this one doesn't have any what we call traditional studios. In other words, the only studios here are the studio lofts that are appropriate for the artists. So I think here we've really achieved the kind of unit mix that we've been shooting for, and I think the fact that it does include space appropriate for artists is really key, and to the extent people are listening, I'd like to see more of that.
Well, it appears to close the council debate. I'll just observe that with this project, we're seeing that new technologies make it possible for projects to actually consume less water than what they've replaced. I mean, here we had a restaurant, which is a big water user, but we're going to have perhaps restaurants downstairs and now 100 households living on this site. And from the projections, at least we're hearing so far, it will actually use less water than what was there previously. And I think, you know, that is the necessary future for California. We can't refuse to house people because there's a water shortage, but we can house them in a way that doesn't consume more water. And I just want to say this project appears to have done an exemplary job in the engineering of its water, such that I think it's the first one we've seen that demonstrably will use less water than what is being replaced, and I'm very glad to see that. We're ready for a roll call vote on this, I believe. The motion was made by Councilmember Davis and seconded by Councilmember O'Connor.
Councilmember O'Connor?
Yes.
Councilmember O'Day?
Yes.
Councilmember Winter?
Yes.
Councilmember Himmelrich not present. Councilmember Davis?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Vasquez?
Yes.
And Mayor McCune?
Yes, and so that is passed unanimously by the City Council with 6 members present, and Councilmember Himmelrich still in New York as far as we know. And we'll move on to item 8C. 8A.
Item 8A, update on status of pending plans and projects, and we have 7 requests to speak.
This, I believe, is going to be a staff report from the top of the heap. Our City Manager, Rick Cole.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the City Council, citizens and city staff who are here tonight. It is, in fact, unusual for the City Manager to deliver a staff report, although certainly not unprecedented. I am going to be introducing a joint item from me and David Martin, our Director of Planning and Community Development. And we've teamed up on this because this marks a very significant step forward. It's in a series of forward steps for the city of Santa Monica, and it's congruent with the discussions and the successes that have been just discussed and approved tonight. Clearly, we've come a long way in promoting enhanced community benefits through the process of development agreements. What I want to talk about tonight is the next step, having the City Council unanimously adopting a new zoning code lays the foundation for us to move forward, not just on a project-by-project basis, but on a comprehensive basis. If we can go to the second slide. Back in 2010, the City Council adopted the land use and circulation element, an award-winning milestone in one that culminated 7 years of public participation and discussion and debate. And the focus of that land use and circulation element upon which the zoning code was based was maintaining the character of Santa Monica while enhancing the lifestyle of all who live here. Next slide. What does that mean? Well, there were a series of values outlined in the introduction to the LUCE, starting with preserving existing neighborhoods. Some 94% of the land uses in the city were maintained as they have been for a generation. To manage traffic and congestion. No one is under the illusion that we can eliminate traffic as long as we're dependent upon cars to get around. What the council has adopted in its new strategic goals is really opening up and ushering in the new history that the mayor noted in the rendering with the light rail, the completion of $1.5 billion public investment that will bring the regional rail network to 4 blocks of our pier, that will connect with our downtown, that will be the cornerstone of a new revamped Big Blue Bus network, that will be the focus of a new precedent-setting, first in the region bike sharing program. All these and the changes that people are making in their individual behaviors are the real hope for managing traffic and congestion in the future. Obviously, we want to preserve the city's unique character. Now, people differ on how to describe Santa Monica's essence, but they share a belief that that essence is very special and needs to be preserved and enhanced. We talked a lot about housing tonight, and it remains part of both the DNA and the public mandate of the voters of this city that they want to see housing for a broad spectrum of people in all walks of life, that people shouldn't have to drive here from far away to work here. The people who live here should be able to find places to work and to connect those as much as possible. And we also were committed in the loose to the value of increased open space and connectivity, to providing community benefits, and to ensuring a sustainable Santa Monica. In the last two public hearings, in which these two development agreements for residential projects in and around the downtown have emphasized, this remains the focus of the staff and this to incorporate these values into projects. There's been a particular emphasis on providing community benefits. And as we've seen, those community benefits have been ratcheted up, they've been enhanced, they've been perfected. Some of the original ideas that didn't work out as well as we'd hoped have been refashioned to much more practical and sustainable and actionable and even measurable community benefits. If we can have the next slide. That said, I believe that working project by project has reached a point of diminishing returns in the city of Santa Monica. That doesn't mean we should never have development agreements, but it means that we shouldn't negotiate them one by one. We now know what we should get out of development in the city. We know that new development should respect context and historic architecture and surroundings. We know that new development should provide its share of contributions to affordable housing and to a range of housing types and housing affordability in our city. We know that projects should be environmentally sustainable and meet gold or platinum standards, that they should be engineered to save water and to save energy. And the list of community benefits that we've worked on one by one really now are clear, and they should apply to all projects, and it should be a high standard in Santa Monica. We have the ability to hold development to those high standards, and every single development ultimately should come under that purview. With, as I mentioned before, the unanimous adoption by the City Council of a new zoning code, the vast majority of territory in the city now comes under a comprehensive plan. We don't need development agreements to be negotiated project by project. It may take the development agreement form to lock in those community benefits, but no longer will they need to be done individually. We can hold people to citywide standards in the area of the city that is covered by the zoning code. And that will spare, frankly, our city staff from the criticism of, well, you didn't ratchet this project up enough. You didn't hold the developers' feet to the fire. It will eliminate some of the political kabuki theater of whatever the staff negotiates is never enough, and let's go to the Planning Commission and ratchet it up some more, and the developer knows that kabuki theater, so they hold back something to give up at the Planning Commission, and that continues. All of that is unnecessary. We now know what the standards ought to be, and the council ought to set them, and we ought to hold everyone to those standards. It also spares the city council having to stay up late at night, essentially being the Planning Commission and holding hearings project by project, when again, through the zoning code and through the high standards you set on each individual project, we now know what you want. And if we can get more, then you should set those standards, and we should apply those standards across the board to every project that comes through. And that will also spare developers the pain of having to go through these long, protracted, expensive, and ultimately wasteful processes of redesigning projects, of going back and back and back. And finally, it will spare neighbors the uncertainty and the feeling of frustration, and the feeling that they're not listened to, and the feeling that our processes are not transparent, and that they can't go to bed at night knowing what the height limit is on the parcel next door to them, for fear that a development agreement will be entered into which is not tied to any objective and consistent and transparent standard. So development agreements have made a major contribution to ratcheting up community benefits. But now it's time to move to the next stage of development in the city. And that is very simply as what one of the great planners of today's planning profession, Gail Goldberg, used to call real planning. Not reacting to developer proposals, but in fact setting out very clearly our expectation for the public realm, our expectation for living up to our community values, our expectations for what the codes and standards ought to be on height and mass and bulk and context. We ought to set those standards. That's real planning. That is making clear in advance what the expectations are so that both developers and neighbors know what it is we're looking for in the city of Santa Monica. So we've taken the first step, which is to adopt a new zoning code. Now we have to implement it and apply it to projects as they come forward. Will there be exceptions? Will there be problems? Will there be unanticipated challenges? There always are. This is a complicated, diverse city with complicated and diverse constituencies. So some of the zoning code will have to be amended. That's part of the system. Some of the things that have been put in place, when we test them against reality, will show unanticipated consequences. But those will be at the margins. The fact is that 7 years of planning on the loose and 5 years to get to a new zoning code have pretty clearly smoked out what the expectations are for the vast majority of parcels and for the great middle ground of public opinion in Santa Monica. We need to, as I've emphasized, standardize community benefits, not a process of going into a smoke-filled room and figuring out what this project ought to ante up or what neighborhood group this developer ought to cater to, or what constituency this developer ought to seek and court support from, but rather, what are you going to do to meet the community benefits the City Council and the Planning Commission have set for all projects and all development across the board in a consistent and straightforward manner. And ultimately the centerpiece of this, to do real planning, we have to complete the downtown specific plan. Santa Monica has one of the great downtowns of Southern California and arguably one of the great downtowns of the United States. It's a remarkable treasure that people here care about deeply, that is well managed, has an extraordinarily successful business improvement district, is economically healthy, draws visitors not just from around the country but from around the world. It is a remarkable place, but it's a fragile place, and it's a place that needs to be cultivated carefully. And the planning is not just an abstract process of FARs, of floor area ratios, or arbitrary height limits. It really goes to a much finer grain of what human scale maintenance, planning, new development, historic preservation, all of those pieces go into making sure that downtown Santa Monica continues to move forward, and that all of the successes that have led to where we are today are protected and built upon. And that ultimately comes down to a focus not on reaching abstract formulas that focus in on the finances of development. It's about making great places, because great places will be the best guarantor of our sustainable prosperity. Individual projects are not going to pay the bills. A great downtown will. A great downtown does. We are one of the handful of cities in the state of California with a AAA rating, not because this project or that project paid this fee or that fee, but because Santa Monica is a remarkable place to live, a remarkable place to work, and a remarkable place to visit. And that is the foundation for sustainable economic prosperity for the city. So, the next slide, is simply a picture that I think more than any 1,000 words from me sums up what makes great places. It's not necessarily iconic architecture. It's architecture that creates a consistency. It's architecture that uses good materials. It's architecture that blends together. But most of all, it's architecture that contributes to a rich, dynamic, and successful public realm. That's our job. What happens inside buildings is primarily a function of the private market. Our job is to create the public realm that supports what goes on in commercial projects, in retail projects, in residential projects. And Santa Monica on the 3rd Street Promenade, after some not particularly successful stabs at trying to figure out how to make that street work, finally created one of the iconic streets in the country, truly one of the great streets in America, a street that's validated not just by winning awards or by the praise of critics, but every day by local residents and by visitors and by shoppers and by diners and by tourists and by people who are just out to enjoy an evening of strolling and being out in a great place. That's what validates the success of 3rd Street Promenade. And it's not a product of floor area ratios. It's a product of incredible hard work, sweat, toil, and tears by people who sat at this dais, as planning commissioners, by people who sat at this dais as city council members and had the courage and the vision and the stamina and the tenacity to make that a great place. And now it's our job to make sure that this is the kind of place we have all over downtown and in our neighborhoods. Not the same scale, not the same intensity, not the same brilliance, but the same quality as we have on the 3rd Street Promenade. We have the luxury in Santa Monica of insisting on high quality development, and we should do so. So what are the next steps? You're going to hear from David, who will share in more depth what we're recommending in terms of next steps to ensure that we continue Santa Monica's legacy of making great places and move forward to do real planning. So one of the next steps is we want to bring back to you the standards for all housing projects that will be processed between now and the final adoption of the downtown specific plan. By the way, that is not very many. There are perhaps 1 or 2 in the pipeline that will get final action before the proposed downtown specific plan comes before you for consideration and adoption. But however many projects they are, they should meet the same standards as you adopted tonight for the 2 projects that you did, and take into consideration some of the concerns you raised about these 2 projects. We have a little bit of time, and so tonight we invite your input on what those standards should be, and then we will be bringing back to you what we have heard and from you planning about what you expect all development agreements to incorporate. We also are asking, with the exception of 4th and 5th in Arizona and the 4th Street Cinema, both of which are city projects, both of which you have 100% control of because it's city land, that all other commercial projects be postponed until after the downtown specific plan is adopted. That will mean that any future hotels or any future retail or commercial development needs to be in compliance with the downtown specific plan, or go through the process of seeking an amendment to the downtown specific plan. That's always possible under California law, although I think if we do a good job on the downtown specific plan, we're not going to want to turn around and amend it. We're going to want to stick to it. We are also going to talk, and David will talk in more detail, we think there's a great opportunity that's really come together with the completion of the Expo line and with the potential to tackle one of the worst nightmares of mobility in our town, which is the 4th and 5th off-ramp of the 10 freeway. It's been a bottleneck and a frustration for residents and visitors alike for years, if not decades. It was poorly designed by Caltrans years ago, and it's clearly become a major hang-up. Former Mayor Feinstein talked about it in a column today in the Daily Press. We have the opportunity to address and repair that long-time bottleneck. We have to do it comprehensively, though, and so we are recommending that even before the downtown specific plan is completed, we begin a more intense public process of involving the community in planning for what we do with capping the freeway, flying over the freeway, shifting parking to the periphery of downtown versus inviting cars into our already overcrowded downtown, and trying to rationalize the connection between our thriving downtown and our beautiful civic center, and addressing a 50-year-old scar that cuts between two very successful parts of the city that really should be knit together and should have greater synergy. And then finally, as I said before, the cornerstone of everything we're talking about is to complete the downtown specific plan. And let me emphasize, the goal is not just to get something adopted. The goal is to have something that will make sure that for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, we have a vision, we have a plan, we have a code, and we have a blueprint for ensuring that downtown Santa Monica remains a great place and becomes a better place. That's what the Downtown Specific Plans agenda is, and we look forward to working with the community, with the Planning Commission, and with the City Council to meet a June deadline for adopting of the Downtown Specific Plan. Thank you, and I'll turn it over to David.
So now Santa Monica's Planning Director, David Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Cole. Yeah, I'd like to touch first on the downtown plan and go over some details on that. Also, the priority processing criteria that the City Council established back in 2013. I want to go over that again and tell you the results of that. And then also go over the pending development agreements that we have and describe for you where we are with those. So first, focusing on the schedule for the downtown plan. As Mr. Cole mentioned, we will bring it to City Council for final approval in June of 2016. This is just a roadmap that shows you how we get there. So we have meetings scheduled with the plan. We have the EIR that will be released in December. We will hold community meetings in the winter of 2016, back to the Planning Commission for their final review and recommendation to Council in spring 2016, and then on to City Council spring, summer 2016. So that's the schedule we're working on now. Within the downtown plan, we have the Tier 2 process similar to the zoning ordinance. So we'd be able to establish a Tier 2 where it's through development review permit. There's a prescribed package of community benefits, again, very similar to what we have in the zoning ordinance. Also within the downtown plan, we are recommending that we include a non-negotiated Tier 3 process. So projects up to a certain size that would be considered Tier 3 would be processed through a development review permit, and we would expect that the community benefits required for those projects would be obviously more than what the Tier 2 is. We haven't landed exactly where that is yet, but where we ratchet up the impact fees, for example, and where we require more affordable housing for the Tier 2 development review permits, we would require even more for the Tier 3 development agreement permits. And I think your feedback tonight on what kind of packages you would expect to see in those Tier 3 projects would be helpful for us. And then Rick mentioned the Gateway Access Master Plan, and this slide is just to show you that location, if necessary for your discussion. But as you can see, what we're talking about is the area between Ocean Avenue and 5th Street. So it includes 3 parcels fronting on Colorado, the Wyndham Hotel site, between Ocean and Main Street, the Sears site between Main Street and 4th Street, and then the TOD site. This aerial is before they started construction on the station, but The station currently is right on the corner there, but that site is between 4th and 5th Street. We do have a pending development agreement application for the Wyndham site. We have had recent conversations with the owner of the Sears property. They are finally appear to be ready to move on some kind of development there. And then, of course, the TOD site will be the subject of a future city RFQ, RFP process. But again, we feel like looking at these three properties comprehensively, thinking about what opportunities development of these sites would provide for freeway capping, thinking about how we can untangle the access issues we have in this area, it's really a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and we think it's very important to take advantage of that. As Rick said, we would start that process before the downtown plan is adopted, but given the time that it will take, we expect that it will lag a bit behind the adoption of the downtown plan. What we expect to do from an environmental perspective is to include those sites. They are currently included in the downtown EIR. We expect that they would be cleared for some level of development, and then we would consider whatever comes out of the Gateway Access Master Plan, and then determine if we need to go back and do additional environmental work to clear that additional development, if that's what happens there. So they may be cleared by the downtown EIR. They may require a little bit more work. So now moving on to the council priority project criteria that was established back in 2013. And just to remind you, so what the council said at that time was projects that include education, revenue generation, a certain level of affordability, Tier 1 and Tier 2 projects, and a certain unit mix would be considered priority processing, and that we should move quickly or at least move forward on those. And we've been successful with that. Under education, the Crossroads Science Building had their grand opening a couple weeks ago. Revenue generation, we have a new mini auto dealership under construction at 14th and Santa Monica Boulevard. And then, of course, the affordable housing and the unit mix, those are evidenced by the projects that you saw tonight. So the council's direction to prioritize those types of projects and move them forward, I think has served us well and allowed us to bring those projects forward. And then now looking at pending development agreements, we currently have 28 pending development agreements, and that's a bit of a scary number, but I think if you break it down and really look at what that includes, it's not quite so bad. So we have the city projects. Rick mentioned 4th and 5th in Arizona and the ArcLight, and we would move forward on those, although we don't think that either of those would get to you before June of 2016. We also have two mixed-use projects, one at 1325 6th and another one at 1430 Lincoln, and those are in the city project category because they are part of the fire station swap. So in order for us to clear the land where we hope to build the new fire station number 1 on 7th, we need to approve some projects that would allow some parking covenants to be moved, and that's what those projects are for. So we are prioritizing the processing of those in order to accomplish that. And then 1415 5th and 1560 Lincoln, so those were projects that you reviewed and approved tonight. There's another one at 1601 Lincoln, that's the Norms project. The Planning Commission has recommended approval of that project, and we will bring that to you on December 8th. And then there's a project at 3008 Santa Monica Boulevard. That's one that was a development agreement, and they've converted to a development review permit. So again, this is something that we were hoping to see when we adopted the zoning ordinance, is that if we provide a development review permit process, some applicants will adjust their, in this case they didn't need to adjust their project because it was already a Tier 2, but in some cases projects could be modified and the development review route could be taken. And then finally 500 Broadway, and that's a project where the EIR is currently out for public review, and we expect to bring that to the Planning Commission after the first of the year and to City Council probably spring of 2016, around that time. And that's it's a project that provides a lot of housing units, approximately 260. It provides an opportunity for a full-service grocery store in the downtown, and it's about a half a block from the Expo station. So we think it's a very important project and one that's well-positioned. And so those are the things we expect that we would be working on, and some that you would see prior to June 2016. And then we look at, excuse me.
I could just summarize that, again, 28 projects in the pipeline and ones that are further down the pipeline. But between now and the proposed adoption of the downtown specific plan, we're really talking about 6 projects that potentially could come for a final development, or 6 projects that would move forward to the council, of which no more than 4 would be coming for final approval. So even the projects that are being processed would still come under the downtown specific plan. And those 4 are, beyond the ones that you approved tonight, those 4 are all residential priority projects with the level of affordable housing that you've already set as the floor, and potentially a higher floor, depending on what direction you give us tonight and when we come back. So again, the kind of boogeyman of 28 projects, as David has outlined and will continue to do, understandably, that created a lot of apprehension that there was going to be this flood of single project by project considerations. That we are tonight corralling that to a very small number and a very specific set of projects. Again, moving forward to at least have consideration of what the council wants to do with the 2 projects where you own the land on behalf of the community, and moving forward 4 projects that are previously identified priority projects. They're housing projects, and they each have a high level of affordable housing, and we can set a higher level going forward.
Thank you. And then looking at the development agreements that you certainly wouldn't see until after June of 2016, and some you may not see at all, so I want to go over those. So there's the 6 that are mixed use standards. So we will continue to work on those and bring those forward as soon as they are ready. 5 of the 6 that you see on the screen are in the downtown. So we would expect that some of these, since you won't see them before, 4 of the 6, the 1431 Colorado is not, but 4 of the 6 are in the downtown. So those are projects that could take advantage of not just a tier 2 process in the downtown plan, but possibly a tier 3 project with a prescribed set of community benefits. So some of those projects could easily switch from a development agreement to a development review permit. And then the large group of projects you see, I think there's 10 there in the inactive category. It's important to acknowledge kind of where those projects are, because they are projects that have been filed, but frankly they are ones that we have not worked on. We have not really done anything with these for, in some cases, a few years. Either we haven't heard from the applicant, they haven't redesigned the project to meet priority processing. In some cases we've been told that the projects will be withdrawn, but they haven't been yet. But technically they are still development agreement applications, but I mention these because I want to make it clear that these really aren't moving forward at all at this point, and would likely only move forward if they came back with a redesign of some kind. And then finally there's the 3 hotel projects, and those are, we do have applications for all 3 of those. We have heard that from all 3 that they are looking at redesigns. We haven't seen those redesigns. So on the Miramar, we would need to receive the redesign from the applicant in order to proceed with the EIR. And then on the other 2 hotel projects, the Santa Monica and Ocean and the Wyndham, neither of those have even come to council for float up. So you haven't authorized those projects to move forward as development agreements, and we have done no work on those in terms of environmental work or anything else. So those projects are not moving forward at this point. And then I also wanted to mention just, again, some trends since we adopted the zoning ordinance. And again, we hope to see some development review permits come through. As I mentioned, 3008 Santa Monica converted from a DA to a DR. We received development review applications for 2 projects, one at 1920 Ocean and 1820 Ocean Avenue. Those are both by the same developer. One's next door to Casa del Mar, and the other one's at the corner of Pico and Ocean. Those are both tier 2 projects. And then finally, we did receive a development review application for 1626 Lincoln, which is a community corporation project. And beyond that, I don't have it listed here, but there also is at least one development review permit for an office project. It's the where the post office used to be. So we have a development review permit pending for that project, and that development review we would also continue to work on. And then finally, I put this slide up here just to help guide the council's discussion. What we are asking for or looking for from the council tonight is to confirm the direction on the DSP and the creation of the Gateway Access Master Plan, to direct staff to continue processing DR permits, downtown housing projects, and city-related projects, and then direct staff to establish a proposed list of community benefits, obtain planning commission input, and then return to the council in early 2016 with a recommended package of community benefits. And that concludes my part of the presentation.
And before the staff, first of all, thank you both very much for that presentation. But before we ask questions, I think the city attorney would like to clarify what California law may place as some constraints on what we might do.
Or I could do a simpler thing than that and just make a couple of suggestions. First of all, one of the goals that the manager mentioned in his speech was moving forward with some improvements to, or hopefully not some, hopefully big improvements to the 4th Street off-ramp. He also mentioned the long-standing proposal to deck part of the freeway. On those items tonight, if those come within the ambit of your consideration, it would be best if you could handle that with directions to staff about what to bring you, rather than with a protracted discussion, because there's no agenda notice on those. Also, my other suggestion is that in number 3 on this list of council actions, the manager had talked about, in the interest of transparency, promoting public confidence and predictability for developers, things that would be good for everyone, that the city work on, his word was, standardizing community benefits. I want to suggest thinking of it in just slightly different terminology to make sure we comply with state law. The planning director has denominated that as a recommended package. We were thinking of terms like guidelines, recommendations. Standards is a dangerous word legally in the context of development agreements, but I think exactly the same purpose could be worked on if we talked about those as a public conveyance of our expectations, what we think the council is going to have to want, what the guidelines are, what your expectations are. I think it would come out to the same thing. So thank you for considering those suggestions.
Well, thank you. We have about 7 members of the public who want to speak, but first let's go through whatever questions the council has for staff about what has just been discussed. Councilmember Davis?
I just have a couple of quick questions. The first one has to do with the GAMP, the Gateway Access Master Plan.
It's an acronym already.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate acronym a little bit, but so the properties that are mentioned in the staff report include the Wyndham Hotel, the Sears property, and the TOD site. And being cautious of Ms. Mutri's recent statement, since we are at least perhaps going to give direction about the freeway off-ramp, doesn't it make sense to include the piece of property that actually abuts the off-ramp, namely what we all now call the comma building?
Yes, and we do include that in the recommendation. So,
okay, because in the staff report it's not listed as one of them.
Okay, so I could have been clearer about that, but no, when we think of the TOD site, the Apple building, which is a city-owned property, and the comma building would be included in that property.
Okay, so maybe I just wasn't clear when you said TOD site that it included those two. The other question I have 2 more questions, because the other question I have is about, does it make sense as we think about the GAMP, and not necessarily suggesting that there should be any changes there, but because I know that Big Blue Bus access, ingress and egress is important, to at least include that property in the planning process, so that as we're making decisions about who goes where and does what, we're at least including the Big Blue Bus facility, its layout, whether we need to change some ingress and egress there, that sort of thing.
Yeah, we think it makes a lot of sense to include that in the analysis. As you point out, we don't really have any place else to put the Big Blue Bus yard, but it may be that shaving off a corner or just doing there might be some little bit of it that would really help us in terms of access for the overall access area. So we would like to consider that property in our analysis and see what what might be able to help.
And then the other question I have, complete 180, and I don't know if it's for Mr. Cole or you, Mr. Martin, but in the presentation where there was discussion a lot about sustainability, primarily economic sustainability. But one of the things that I'm very concerned about is that our little portion of God's little acre here, that we are addressing the issue of climate change, and how the downtown, particularly because it does tend to be denser, has the greatest impact on the climate, but also perhaps provides the greatest opportunity to reduce our collective carbon footprint. I don't kid myself that by driving a Prius, I'm solving climate change, but I'm doing my little part. And I'm wondering how that figures into your analysis in terms of viewing the downtown specific plan, not just in terms, as Mr. Cole says, of FAR and height, but really how it performs in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, that sort of thing.
So we are doing an environmental impact report on the downtown plan. I'm not sure to what extent we are analyzing greenhouse gas emission and those kind of things in the plan, but I would expect that that's all covered within the analysis that we'll bring you when we bring you the plan for adoption.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Including mitigation and opportunities. Again, this gives me an opportunity to fence a little bit with our city attorney. I think we are on the same page substantively. And what I'm talking about is not a set of standards. What I'm talking about is a standardized list of community benefits. So that because we do have the ability under California law, and the city attorney and I see eye to eye on this, the city does have fairly broad powers to, when it's entering into a development agreement, to say this is what we want in a development agreement. And they all have to be 5 years, or they all have to be whatever. So that's the kind of package we're talking about. And it certainly could include, and that's what we're looking for tonight in terms of input, greater focus on climate change and the mitigation and adaptation strategies that can be incorporated into new development and adaptive reuse in our downtown. So that's what we're really looking for tonight, is what are you looking for, not in just some development agreements, but in all development agreements.
And let me just stress, I was very happy that Councilmember Davis didn't get into the details. I think we all have ideas for what could happen in the area covered by the Gateway Ingress Master Plan, but that is not agendized. What we can discuss tonight is whether to ask staff to go forward, maybe to some extent the scope of that in terms of what area we expect it to cover, but not specifically yet what we hope to happen. We all have many things we hope might happen in that part of our city. So with that, we've concluded our questions of staff. We'll move on to the public hearing on item 8A. As always, I'll call 3 names at a time and ask people to stand and be ready when their turn comes. Our first speaker will be Denise Barton. For 2 minutes for Ms. Barton. People of California has asked for 1 minute, and then Scott Schoenfeld for the 2 minutes. Ms. Barton, you're first.
Good evening. I think we can all see by the interim zoning ordinance for downtown, you have no intention of diversity downtown. I mean, with affordable housing only for people at 50 to 80% of the average median income, are you purposely trying to exclude affordable housing for people at 30% AMI downtown? Next, art, culture, and entertainment. I don't think the residents would be very excited about paying $2.5 million for more banners to signify downtown, or for patterns on the sidewalks. Historical preservation. I would say my building and the new building owners show how much you really care about historical preservation, which isn't much. I thought there were standards for the way buildings and property needed to look downtown, because by sitting back and doing nothing, you are allowing downtown to become a slum. Circulation and mobility. You want to do what hasn't worked in the past, like one-way streets, or saying there's private parking available to the public when there's not. Okay, but what am I saying? Sarah Lejeune said residents need to get out of their cars. But if you're going downtown, yes, bring your car and pay to use parking structures. You seem to be under the delusion that when the train starts running, your traffic problems will be over. But I'd say people are driving more now due to the incompetent, inept, and unreliable bus service. So if you continue putting more housing and businesses without reliable transportation, that will equal more cars, more slum-like conditions. Then development standards and design guidelines. Your being willing to overlook normally required things is interesting, considering no matter how boxy or how high it is. In ending, I do hope that the Pocket Park program Rick Cole approved is not going to be downtown, because I don't think the Coastal Commission would see that as a positive thing, considering it takes away parking. Thank you.
People of California, 1 minute.
Yes, thank you. The downtown Santa Monica and specific plan, overarching goal, it seems to be, is the generation of demand. And that is apparently the unspoken element in this trickle-down supply-side argument we hear for housing and affordable housing, allegedly affordable housing. And I think those were at one point called voodoo economics. It's all about profits over people. There's no 30% AMI being included. And as I heard in a city report, that's like 25% of the city. Okay, and you can just forget about student housing. I mean, there's no 50% AMI students that aren't going in for their second or third, vanity degree. As far as Mr. Isla grabbing these apartments and whatnot, 50% AMI, he's getting a payoff, maybe not as much as he should be. But obviously, I think that would make him some kind of lobbyist. If Caltrans ever allows freeway capping, perhaps that's where these people can sleep, is under the freeway.
Thank you. Everybody else on this item is asked to the full 2 minutes. So it'll be Scott Schoenfeld, followed by Andrew Hoyer, and then Zena Josephs.
Thanks. Good evening, Council. My name is Scott Schoenfeld. I'm a resident of Ocean Park and owner of the office building located at 1640 5th Street, also known as the Comma Building. I fully support the Gateway Access Master Plan, and I think it's a great idea. We originally purchased the Comma Building with the intent to renovate and continue to operate as an office building, but believe it should ultimately be redeveloped in conjunction with the city-owned site in order to accomplish the key objectives of the Luce and the draft downtown specific plan. This is also consistent with the Planning Commission's direction for the site at the August 5th meeting. By now you all know that I've been actively working on the off-ramp realignment for the last few years. We've completed preliminary traffic and engineering studies that demonstrate this is a feasible project that will have game-changing positive effects on circulation in the downtown, Civic Center, and Ocean Park. We've made great progress with Caltrans, and they've been ready to go for the last 18 months. I fully support the staff's desire to move forward with studying the potential flyover and capping, but I'm also hopeful that the next step in the Caltrans process, which is the completion of a project study report, can occur simultaneously with this plan. I'd very much like to continue to be a partner in that process to the extent that it would be helpful. The sites within the master plan area have significant access issues and constraints that obviously need to be resolved, but they also provide an unprecedented opportunity to improve multimodal access, circulation, and connectivity for the greater downtown, Civic Center, and Ocean Park. Any redevelopment of the TOD site, for example, should prioritize circulation improvements like the off-ramp realignment and peripheral parking and create a place for people at the gateway to downtown. I'm looking forward to a comprehensive, collaborative, and transparent master plan process. I especially like this concept because it could allow for earlier and more continuous and robust community engagement by both the city and the private stakeholders. Lastly, I'm also hoping that we can find a way to create a temporary, active public space at the Expo Station on day one or soon after. Thanks.
Mr. Schoenfeld, I have a question for you, something you said. For 17 years, I've worked with Caltrans on everything from sound walls to freeway decking. Ready to go has never been in their vocabulary in 17 years that I've talked to them. So when you say they're ready to go, what do you mean by that?
I will forward you emails from Caltrans saying what's up with the 4th Street off-ramp realignment project.
Great. Thank you. Next speaker is Andrew Hoyer.
Good evening. Thank you. All I have to say is it's about time. Been 5 years since you started the Luce. You approved the Luce, and you've been spending 5 years disapproving DA after DA after DA after DA. Meanwhile, the zoning ordinance update sat there and cooled its heels for a while, and the Memorial Park plans over here. Bergamo, at least we got Bergamo done. So I am very supportive of stopping all the DAs, just telling people to hold off. Let us finish our zoning. Let us finish all our various plans so you know what to expect. I definitely agree with there should be a list of community benefits. So when they want to do a development review project, they can say, well, we could do any 5 of these 10 things and it'll be approved. So they need to know what we want, and I think this is a very good plan, and I think you should move forward with it. I don't know what else I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Zena Josephs, followed by Jerry Rubin and Kathleen Rawson.
Thank you. Again, I'm speaking only for myself. I wanted to thank Mr. Cole for going to the effort to go out and visit all the neighborhood organizations and to listen as well as to speak to them, and also to the neighborhood council. We appreciated it very much. Last week, when you were at the Wilmot meeting, you happened to mention briefly what was coming tonight, and a big cheer went up in the room, and it was a very well-attended meeting, so we do appreciate this concept. You know, the neighborhood organization reps meet once a month with David Martin, and he gives us a list of the pending development projects, the major ones. And I have, this one's a little out of date, it's from July. So there are 28 development agreements on it. And about 20 of them were downtown mixed-use projects. So here were the number of units: 48, 27, 64, 61, 62, 262, 65, 77, 90, 60, 100, 60, 190, 78, 79, 74, 91. It adds up to 1,490 units in downtown. I understand now that some of those have been withdrawn, but all the worry about no housing going forward, that's not something those of us who attend these meetings worry about. Thank you.
Next speaker is Jerry Rubin.
Thanks again, Mayor McKeown, council members. Jerry Rubin, Santa Monica. Well, I'm wearing my I Love Santa Monica t-shirt, and after hearing our new city manager, Rick Cole, speak today, I feel even better about Santa Monica and our future, and more inspired. We all need to come together. That's why I'm not really in favor of these proposed ballot initiatives. I think they're divisive. I think we can do better than that. I recommend against even threatening ballot initiatives. It's just not good for Santa Monica. As far as development agreements, I've seen the process work, but I think what Rick Hall's suggesting could be even better. As far as what would be good for downtown, quality, everything, obviously, over the decades, city staff and the residents have been doing something right, because people all over the country, all over the world, and people all over Santa Monica and the outlying areas seem to love Santa Monica. That's what I hear. As far as taller buildings, I don't think a few would hurt if they provide more open space, have good design and quality design, provide substantial community benefits, help promote low-income and affordable housing, create more local hiring jobs, and in the case of proposed hotel projects, more good union jobs. And I do think that good, tough transportation management programs would be effective for any new development. So again, I think Santa Monica is on a good course. Maintain that AAA bond rating and keep going.
And our last public speaker on item 8A is Kathleen Rawson.
Good evening, Council. My name is Kathleen Rawson. I'm the CEO of Downtown Santa Monica, Inc., your board to advise you on all issues related to downtown. So the draft specific plan came out, I think, in February 2014, and we've been working for a year and a half on the specific plan. And we recently held a day-long retreat with our board and came up with a variety of recommendations for you. But I'm going to focus on what you're focused on tonight. Specifically, we think it's very important to create a standardized package of community benefit options for developers. It adds a predictability. It's a very good thing. During your negotiations with developers, community benefits should be considered along a continuum of temporary revocable types of benefits to recurring and enduring benefits. For example, temporary revocable benefits could be things like one-time funding contributions or open space with limited public access. Those would be less desirable, of course. Better are those that are ongoing funding contribution or deed-restricted affordable housing. We also think, given the unique intensity of downtown, that greater fees could be considered for both Tier 1 and Tier 2 projects. And then finally, the Gateway Access Master Plan, the board absolutely supports, but as Councilmember Davis suggested, the Big Blue Bus does take up 4.25% of the downtown. It's a lot of acreage, and we think that it's important to include that in that plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rawson. I have a question for you from Councilmember Davis.
Thank you, Ms. Rawson. One of the issues as we go forward thinking about the downtown specific plan and how to address a lot of the issues that we're talking about tonight, or will be talking about tonight, is the idea whether or not downtown is for residents as opposed to visitors. And I know that your group does some analysis of how frequently downtown is used by residents, and I don't want to put you on the spot because I know you didn't come prepared for that, but I wonder if you can just give us a general idea about the level of usage of our downtown area by residents.
Well, thank you for the question, and I know I don't have the statistics right in front of me, but I will tell you that while it's more and more difficult to stop people on the street who are residents, because those of us who live around here just sort of keep going, right? We don't stop for someone to ask us. We do also do telephone surveys and cell phone surveys, and we have found that most people who live in Santa Monica visit their downtown at least once a month. And those who come once a month, the majority of them come once a week. So it's a very large number of people who live in Santa Monica that use the downtown. Now, they might use it for banking. They might go to Old Navy. Hopefully soon they'll go to more movies. But so they come for a variety of things, and they may stay a shorter period of time than someone coming from out of town. But residents of this community absolutely use their downtown.
Thank you.
So, Council, that closes the public hearing, and as we enter into discussion, I just want to remind us all that we really have to stick with what is on the agenda. There is so much here of interest to us all on issues that I know we have individually and collectively thought about for many years, but what is on the agenda is a staff recommendation that the City Council prioritize completion of the downtown specific plan, establish a predictable community benefits package for all development agreement projects being processed pending the adoption of the downtown specific plan, and provide priority development agreement processing for projects primarily providing housing until comprehensive standards are implemented with the adoption of the downtown specific plan. So certainly we can always give direction in the course of a council discussion, but I think we need to be careful not to get too deep into some of the details. What we're being asked to do is to ask staff to go ahead and proceed with a process that has been presented to us tonight. So with that advisory, if not warning, I'll turn to Councilmember Davis, and let's hope we can keep the discussion on track.
I'll do my best, but I'm sure you'll correct me if I wander off the reservation. So I want to start out with commenting on the presentation we heard tonight from Mr. Cole and Mr. Martin, because I think it's important to put this all into context. The reason I asked Ms. Rawson the question about how often do residents go downtown is Yogi Berra, who died recently, famously said, nobody goes there anymore, it's too crowded. And that's something we frequently hear when we go out into the community is, oh, I never go downtown. And yet the statistics show differently. It may be that not everyone in Santa Monica goes downtown, but the fact of the matter is that we have always called it's our community's living room, and I think it continues to serve that purpose. And I think as we go forward with the downtown planning process, we have to ask ourselves, why do people go downtown? Why is it such a draw for our residents, such a draw regionally, and such a draw internationally? And without insulting anybody, I hope, I don't think people say, I want to go to downtown Santa Monica because there's a really cool 3-story building there. What we have done to create this downtown is essentially created infrastructure that allows really cool things to be going on. that draws people. It's not the buildings, it's what's going on in the building. So, for example, it's movie theaters, and without trying to go off the reservation, it's opportunities for shopping, it's stores that you might not find anywhere else. And quite honestly, I think it's just the vibrancy of the street, the fact that unlike maybe an indoor shopping mall, you walk down the street, there's outdoor cafes, you can stop and sit by a table. And so for me, when we talk about the downtown, I too concur with Mr. Cole that I want to focus less on height and FAR and really more on how does the downtown perform? What's going on there that's drawing people, and how do we create the infrastructure that will allow more of those attractive things to go on? So I wanted to put that context out there because I think that's really important as we consider what's going on here. So I certainly, I don't know what confirming direction on the DSP means other than go forth and do it.
We're being asked to prioritize the completion of the downtown specific plan, to give staff the direction to put their effort into that.
Right. But I do think that, and it is a priority because it's such an important part of town, not just economically, but I think emotionally. It's when you think of Santa Monica, many of us have traveled all over the world, and you say Santa Monica, and people go, oh yeah, Santa Monica. They're not thinking, with all due respect, to 26 and Wilshire. They're thinking about the pier, they're thinking about the promenade, that sort of thing. So I think certainly agree that we should prioritize it. And I think the creation of the Gateway Access Master Plan, the unfortunate acronym of GAMP, I think is a really good idea. I think that that is something that we have justifiably been criticized for to some extent about not holistically looking at things, particularly at the 4th and Colorado intersection, which has to be one of the most horrendous intersections in the entire county. I mean, it's just, you've got a lot of uses going on there. You've got terrible access to the properties around there. And so I think if we don't plan it holistically, we'll end up with these little balkanized states that nobody can get to. So I think that is really important. But conversely, as I said earlier today, I think it's really important that we do two things. And one is go forward with those types of projects, and I put the movie theaters in particular in that context, but also the 4th and 5th in Arizona project, where there are things that will continue that vibrancy of Santa Monica. I mean, without prejudging projects that haven't come to us yet, the fact is that both of those projects provide entertainment, opportunities for active recreation, like an ice rink, walking, yoga on an elevated thing. So I think that those kinds of projects where we own the land and we can create some more of that ambiance that I think makes downtown so attractive is important. But second of all, creating housing. And I think, and this is where I want to bring in my comment about sustainability, because when I talk about sustainability, I don't think it's even just a question of how many greenhouse gases does this building put off. As we plan the downtown, the question is, are we coming up with a plan that is going to create a synergy between the housing and the businesses to reduce greenhouse gas emissions? In other words, we heard on Sunday some people from Vancouver, they don't have a car. And can we create enough housing where people can walk to everything they need to get to and only use car share when they're going out? So I think for me, it's not just about how much water does this project use or how much carbon does this project use, but are we really being guided overall by the idea that our planet's limited? And so I think that that is one of that sort of bleeds into number 3, which is the proposed list of community benefits. And I think that, again, it's not about, every project has to do X, Y, Z, but I think that that makes perfect sense to try and do a better job of encapsulating what we keep saying over and over again, which is we want this, we want that, and bringing it back in a more predictable form so people can use it. So I don't know if this needs a motion or not, if that's what you're looking for, Mr. Mayor, but I'm happy to make a motion to that we direct staff to make the downtown specific plan a priority and that they create the Gateway Access Master Plan process. I don't know we know what that looks like, but it's a process that we direct staff to continue to process permits, downtown housing projects, and city-related projects. I guess it's development review permits. And that we direct staff to establish a proposed list of community benefits, obtain planning commission input as well as community input, and return to
Understanding that the community benefits would be guidelines to comply with
Right.
state law and development agreements.
Right.
So we have a motion on the floor.
Second.
And a second by Councilmember O'Day. So I thought I heard support for the staff recommendation embedded in what you'd said there. We'll move on to Mayor Pro Tem Vasquez.
Would it be appropriate to add to that motion a list of what I consider community benefits, or should we give direction after this motion?
I think we could give direction on that, but frankly, we didn't agendize that we were going to create a list of community benefits. And if I understood what the city manager was telling us, we have essentially done that over the process of the last several years, and in approving, among other things, the two projects that we voted unanimously to support tonight. I think what we were doing was affirming that these are indeed the sorts of community benefits we need. I don't think we need to start from scratch on a list of community benefits. I think we have that. And I'm seeing nods from staff, so unless you have some community benefit that has never been discussed, which I think would take a long public process to fold into this, I'm not sure how much more direction we could give on that.
Well, I would just like to throw it out there that, and I don't want to get into a heavy discussion on it, but since we're just directing and giving recommendations and suggestions, specifically as we're looking at the downtown, since we are talking about the downtown specific plan, that moving forward, to me, I think the community benefits have been really weak. And I think one of the things that I'd like to see added to it is more input or more, specific dollars, and whatever dollars the staff wants to come back with that's reasonable, it would be to earmark dollars for affordable housing, for example, through these community benefits. Another one I always thought about, especially some of these large projects, i.e. some of these hotels are thinking about the Ocean Avenue piece, is to look at a way that we include, or staff thinks about a way that maybe we can include on top of, other improvements that they might be doing, is to look at as an option, given X dollars, or especially I'm thinking hotels that are prosperous, where you would tie it to the index as they're making money, that they give more on an annual basis to like an educational program or an educate foundation, as an example.
I'm going
to
have to jump in here because we're getting very, very specific on things that weren't agendized. There's a motion on the floor with a second. What I suggest you do is if you'd hold that for direction separate from discussion of what's on the floor right now. Because, for instance, the Ocean Avenue hotels would be part of the downtown specific plan. They wouldn't be part of the process we're talking about tonight. We can certainly give direction. I just don't want to mix the direction in with a motion that has to be on something that was already on the agenda. So if you could just hold that, we'll give direction after we complete discussion of the motion, if that's okay with you.
Fine. I mean, I asked the city attorney, that's why I was bringing it up, and they said you could just throw out examples, and that's what I was trying to, I'm not saying that it has to be.
It was getting a little more specific than examples.
Okay.
So that, I think, needs to be held. Councilmember Winter.
I think I wanted to add some thoughts in the same vein as Mayor Pro Tem Vasquez, so I'll hold off for the time.
All right. Well, then, at this point, we have no further requests to speak from council members on the motion, with the understanding, though, that we're probably going to be giving some direction, which we could always do at the council level. Now I have some speakers. Councilmember Davis, you're the maker of the motion. Do you want to close debate, or did you have something to add?
I just wanted to clarify within my motion that when we talked about creation of the Gateway Access Master Plan process, that it included all the properties that we talked about, including the Big Blue Bus Yard, the Comma Building, as well as the ones that were specifically called out in the staff report.
The clarification appears accepted by staff, and is the second of the motion clear on that? I can't see around Councilmember Winter. He is. Okay. City Manager Rick Cole.
2 points of clarification, and I want to be sure the maker and the seconder are clear what we're asking, and if you have a different interpretation, then we ought to clear it up before you take a vote. One, on the Big Blue Bus, I think David and I are most comfortable, and it's the council's call, treating the Big Blue Bus separately so that we don't raise expectations that we're going to be evicting the Big Blue Bus and developing a tower there. Clearly, we, as David said, agree that location absolutely is an integral part of the planning process, and so if we have the same understanding, that while there may be some modifications to that site, we are not anticipating raising the specter of a long, protracted, complicated, and controversial relocation to the Big Blue Bus yards at this point.
No, that's absolutely. I was just asking that it be considered as part of the plan because we know there are Big Blue Bus ingress and egress issues at that site that are both created by the Expo line, but also just created by the alignment of streets along there. And so, yes, I was never suggesting that it be brought into the process as a potential site for development, but just that the needs of the Big Blue Bus site be included in that gateway access master plan.
And I suspected that we were in accord. I just wanted that to be clear on the record so that we don't set people off on expeditions that are wild goose chases. The second point is I want to be clear that in prioritizing two major planning efforts between now and next June, which is to complete the consideration of the downtown specific plan, which involves civic engagement, which involves planning commission workshops, which involves council hearings, doing all that, and initiating this gateway access master plan process, and continuing to process the priority projects and processing the remaining two city projects. That means we will not be processing commercial projects during that time. That doesn't mean they're dead. That doesn't mean that they'll never see the light of day, but it means that they will not get processed until after the adoption of the downtown specific plan, so we can free up the resources in the planning department to focus in on getting those priorities. And just wanted, again, I know that's seemed implicit in your motion, but I just wanted to be clear so that everyone understands it as legislative history.
Nope,
And frankly, that's something I think that the community has voiced interest in, that we do hold off until we do the downtown specific plan.
And that,
Did
yes.
you wish to go back on the stack? You were off, but okay.
Well, he had asked me a
Councilmember
question,
Davis.
so I just wanted to respond as the maker of the motion. That was certainly implicit in my motion, and I guess the one exception I would make, and we haven't decided on it yet, but there is a commercial component to the 4th and 5th in Arizona site. So that would be one that...
That was a separate, that was the two city projects.
Right.
So yes.
But separate and apart from that, yes, it was implicit that any commercial development within the downtown would be subordinate to all these other things staff will be doing.
So, Council, with the understanding that we may have directions we want to give that will be separate from the motion and therefore not as constrained by having been on the agenda as the motion itself, the motion on the floor is essentially the staff recommendation. Yes. And that was made by Councilmember Davis and seconded by Councilmember O'Day, and we will go to a roll call vote on that.
Councilmember O'Connor?
Yes.
Councilmember O'Day?
Yes.
Councilmember Winter?
Yes.
Councilmember Himmelrich not present. Councilmember Davis?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Vasquez?
Yes.
Mayor McKeon?
Yes, and that passes by a 6-0 unanimous vote of the City Council, with Councilmember Himmelrich still in New York. It's getting late in New York. So now, Council, I know there was some direction or further matters that some of us wanted to address. Let's now do that, knowing that it is direction, something we can do that may not have been on the agenda. We'll start with Mayor Pro Tem Vasquez.
Yes, I just wanted to come back and like I was stating earlier, is these are just examples, and I mean, you know, we could list out several, but one of the things I noticed, or at least one of the things that's been disturbing for me, especially as we move forward, and I think the large hotel projects are kind of on hold and nothing's come back, but I think as they rekindle themselves and begin to rework their plans and come back, I think we need to send, I'd like to see us send a strong message that the community benefits have to be a lot stronger. And as an example, I was looking at specifically hotels because they stand to probably make the most movement forward, especially on the finance side. You know, granted we get TOT out of it, but I think we can get a lot more than just the TOT tax from some of these successful hotels, especially if we're going to grant them some height. And one of the things I always thought about is that putting some kind of an index, and I don't know what that is, you know, what percentage may be, but that it would be earmarked as an example for either educational programs or, you know, the Ed Fund as an example. There's so many things, good things happening in the city that are underfunded. and they're constantly coming to us for money. And, I think rather than constantly coming back to the city, I'd like to see if we can develop some kind of a potential revenue stream as these new projects come online. And those are on the hotel side. Of course, any other projects, large projects that might be coming up around the capping of the freeway, for example, we should be also looking at that, that these people contribute. We heard earlier from one of the testimonies that Caltrans is ready to roll on some of these projects, but I don't think financially they're ready to roll. I think they're just waiting for us to fund these things. And I think we need to look at some revenue streams there as well. The other one as an option that could also be on the list, we're hearing, and I guess pretty soon we're going to get a report back from the working group on the civic auditorium. And I know that's got a big ticket item. And I don't see that moving forward unless we start generating some funds. And these projects could also be contributing to that. I don't know if it's enough or sufficient, but at least some. And then, of course, the last big one for I think all of us is the affordable housing piece. I think we need to start looking at ways that we could earmark more revenue from some of these projects as a community benefit towards an affordable housing fund, for lack of a better word at this point.
So these are all directions that staff can take and include in the process as we go forward with the downtown specific plan and the GAMP and other things. But the distinction I wanted to make is because these weren't on the agenda, they will require further discussion and public hearings. We won't make any decision tonight, and that's in the interest of community inclusion and transparency, that people know that what we vote on is what's on the agenda. So this is all important. I just wanted to explain why I broke it out from the motion. And I think other people have ideas to contribute as well. Councilmember Winter.
Yeah, just a few things. This will come no surprise given my comments on the first item on our after the consent calendar tonight. But I do think it's important as we're talking about here about looking at some of these housing projects downtown prior to completion of the DSP, that I really feel we need to do a better job of looking holistically. And this is part and parcel of what the city manager is talking about planning rather than doing piecemeal approvals. This is the idea that our staff reports would be looking at some of the metrics about our housing goals, both through the loose and the housing element, et cetera, about how where we are relative to those particular goals in regards to this particular project and the ones that are coming after us for potential approval. And then again, looking at the unit mixes that we're getting out of these projects. So we have a bigger picture rather than just what this particular project does, but what it does in serving our broader goals outside of the context of the standalone building. I also think, as as Ms. Joseph noted, that we had all these individual pending projects downtown, which would be about some were 64 units, some were 27 units, et cetera. As we look at that more comprehensively, it's clear to me that going forward, we are going to get most of our housing production in the future out of downtown. And I just hope that at some point we're having some sort of dialogue with the school district about, as we're getting more and more of these 2 and 3 bedroom units, that how is the district going to be able to accommodate these particular new families that are moving into our town and where they will go to school. So I think it's important to always be bearing that in mind. And then finally, as we look at some of these, what we might want out of Tier 3 projects, I think if you look at the 2 projects we approved tonight, I think there's a growing concern that I have and others in this community share that we're generating a lot of market rate housing and then deed restricted housing for those at 80% of AMI and below. And at some point we have to take a look at the people who fall between those 2 income levels of 80% or below, and then the people can afford to pay what now in our city is very high rents for market rates, and whether or not the Tier 3 projects, particularly downtown, are an opportunity to address the needs of those people who are getting priced out of our city, don't qualify for the deed restricted housing as we currently provide it, but can't afford the market rate housing. I think we should pay attention to that issue.
And Councilmember Davis.
Well, let me start out by echoing the concerns of Councilmember Winter that I've said often that, one of my biggest concerns about Santa Monica is we're becoming a microcosm of the United States, where you have the very wealthy and you have the people who might qualify for deed restricted, and the middle class is not being served, both in terms of housing and in terms of other amenities. So I certainly echo that concern. Since we're sort of just creating a list here, I thought I would add a few things. I do want to reiterate my concern about sustainability from a holistic standpoint, not just about an individual, are we saving water on this project or that, but really, given that we're probably in a persistent state of drought, and given that we know that we've man-made climate change has already pushed us past certain breaking points, that we, as we think about the downtown as a holistic place of how can we be a model for other communities as to develop in a sustainable manner, and that includes how do we reduce driving, how do we encourage other modes of transportation, that sort of thing. I certainly want to voice support for the idea about, especially in the Gateway Access Master Plan, of looking at the opportunity to cap all or a piece of the freeway. We are consistently looking for opportunities for open space, and as Will Rogers famously said, by land, God's not making any more of it. Well, this is actually an opportunity to make more land. And I think the current Caltrans rules don't really allow you to put buildings on these caps, and so it really is an opportunity to build some open space. So I think that's something we should look at. I want to emphasize Mayor Pro Tem Vasquez's concern about affordable housing. How do we ratchet up the amount of affordable housing we're getting in inclusionary projects, but also how do we create ongoing sources of revenue for 100% affordable housing? Since we're talking about downtown, it's certainly clear that while our downtown is vibrant, it's also aging. For example, the dinosaur fountains aren't working, that sort of thing. It's just like a person's house. Over time, infrastructure wears out. And so I think one of the things we can look at as we talk about benefits for projects in the downtown is, do they contribute to the aging infrastructure, help us repair things like water pipes, the dinosaur fountains, whatever, the street alleys, needing to be repaved, whatever. I just think that certainly we know we've had problems with the elevators and the parking structures. So I just think looking at it, not only how do we keep the street vibrant, but how do we keep that infrastructure working, because that is part of the experience of going downtown. And I think we need to focus on that. And then finally, I think one of the opportunities we have in downtown, and I know we keep talking about it, but we haven't really figured out a way to do it, and maybe the downtown plan offers an opportunity to make some progress, is the idea about creating what I think of as sort of an architecture and preservation plan. And by that I mean that we have a lot of beautiful buildings in downtown. We've certainly made an effort to preserve many of them. We keep talking about this building's going to have some public art, or that building's going to have some public art. But again, sort of piecemeal planning, like, I'm going to stick a piece of art here, or that sort of thing. And what I'd like to do is approach that holistically. For example, could we create a situation where we are creating a walking tour that includes art and architecture, that sort of thing, and some of our beautiful historical buildings. So as we go forward about planning the downtown, again, thinking about it holistically, how does it present not just to the residents and visitors, but to the world in general? The idea that we could have some of those iconic pieces of art or iconic places where someone says, I'll meet you at the Nelson Column in Trafalgar Square. So I think having that kind of plan, instead of 2% for art in this little building and 2% for art there, can we start to build a fund, or can we start to build momentum for the idea that maybe some bolder artistic steps would be? So those are things. Oh, and then the last thing I put on my list is circulation. And by that I don't just mean automobile circulation, but I think we need to really think about how people move through the downtown. We saw it with the Paseo on the project tonight. That's really interesting, but where does that Paseo go? And yes, it's a way to activate those commercial spaces towards the back of the building, but then what does that alley look like when people walk out? So I think, again, the nooks and crannies, if you want to call them that we have in downtown, are worth taking a look at as we start to think about community benefits.
Thank you. Councilmember Winterer.
Yeah, just looking at my notes, I realized I missed something. So we have directed staff to continue processing DR permits in downtown housing projects. And while it would not come to us, I'm aware that there's a 100% affordable housing project that has certain time deadlines in terms of applying for tax credit. So I'm just hoping that staff will process that one expeditiously.
Council, we've now listed a number of concerns that several of us had that could be addressed either in the downtown specific plan or frankly some of them in other policy formulations that are ongoing. I didn't hear anything there for which there was dissent. So without objection of the council, I'll just say that that is given to staff as direction rather than our having to put it into a series of motions. And unless someone has something to add, we will now conclude item 8A and move on to public input, item 14, because believe it or not, we didn't have any council member items tonight, which I think may be the first time in about a year that one of us didn't put something on the agenda. So would the clerk call item 14?
Item 14, public input. Public comment is permitted only on items not on the agenda that are within the subject matter jurisdiction of the city. State law prohibits the City Council from taking any action on items not listed on the agenda, including issues raised under this agenda item. And we have 3 requests to speak.
We do, and the first will be Denise Barton, followed by People of California, and wrapping it up for the night will be Art Casillas. Ms. Barton, you have asked for 1 minute on this item.
And good evening. Tonight I'd like to say a few words about a very special community leader who passed away recently. I'm talking about Eddie Greenberg. He was committed to the community, which can be seen by the over 30 years he worked for the city, spending many years as a supervisor for the promenade. He was also one of the city's first leaders in sustainability, using environmentally friendly cleaners for many, many years on the promenade. He was a good person who tried to help everyone, from people who worked for the city to the homeless. He was a really kind man and will truly be missed by everyone who knew him. Now I'd like to pause for a moment of silence in his memory. Thank you.
Next is People of California.
Thank you. Last week you were talking about a committee that was going to, or not a committee, but perhaps an investigator of some sort who was going to do something. We're not quite sure what. There was going to be some sort of investigatory process or a PR process. Notice one of the suggested folks runs a crisis management law firm or something. Something very sort of crisis management division of a law firm. Got Susan Estrich, right? A Clinton surrogate at one point. Dukakis campaign manager. It was a very, very well selected group of insiders. I would suggest Kenneth Starr, right up the road, probably looking for work. I don't think it's that hard a call on this one. One thing I never heard anyone talking about was the city going after the people who cost us $1 million by violating the city charter. Unconstitutional acts in violation of the city charter, I do not believe immunity attaches to those. I don't believe we have a duty to defend those people. In fact, I believe we have a fiduciary duty to go after those people, since they cost $1 million for that. I mean, you want to complain about PYFC, that was $190,000. Where to go? Well, maybe there. I also noticed in the loose element of the downtown specific plan package that was put together tonight, the first element was preserve existing neighborhoods. Are we talking about the housing or the people? Because those 30% AMI, they're going to be gone by the time the affordable housing is here. We'll have some folks who are on a list from the Valley or East LA or someplace else because that's just the nature of the beast. Old people move out, new people move in. As long as you have the right number of poor people, we're diverse, right? That's cool. Also, the second item on that list is sort of received wisdom of managing traffic and congestion. And of course, that's 2 items that cross purposes, because by creating congestion, you manage traffic. No one wants to drive. You narrow the streets, where's everyone going to go? Well, they have to walk, right? Well, it didn't work in Katrina.
Our last speaker is Art Casillas. Bring us home.
Art Casillas. At last City Council meeting, September 8th, I warned you of continuing drug problems city officials have refused to help us with. In fact, drug problem is allowed worse around my home for many years as to pressure us out of Santa Monica or ever be able to testify against you. I finished as usual, and then I started out to council chambers and went to the stairwell where City Manager Cole caught up to me and said, I'd like to invite you for coffee to hear about your concerns. I answered I was going to ask you for a meeting, but I've been preparing you by explaining the problem for a few weeks first, so it won't take 9 hours to explain it at our meeting. I said thank you, So when can we meet? He answered, my secretary will call you. I then exclaimed, you're like a fresh breath of air, because I've been at this since November 6th of 1985, so I thank you for your invitation. He then walked off. I told a woman downstairs about invitation. She said, please, Art, don't put all your heart and soul in this, because he seems to be a sweet talker of little substance so far. I answered, he's a Catholic as I am, and he knows God does not take kindly to lying. Okay. So Rich Cole, city manager, never did call. Now I called city manager's office last Tuesday on a different complaint, so I asked the secretary, has city manager Rick Cole tried to call me? She said, no, he never told me. She said, would you like me to ask him? I said, no, he's probably real busy. No, he still hasn't called. I don't know where I stand, but he hasn't called.
I think you'll understand this, Art. Mea culpa. We'll talk soon.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you. That concludes public input item 14 and the agenda for the night. But, you know, a member of the public mentioned Eddie Greenberg, and this is a tough one to have to do because we all knew Eddie very well. It's with great sadness that we adjourn tonight's council meeting in memory of former city employee Eddie Greenberg. Eddie was born in Montreal. He moved to Santa Monica as a child, though he began working for the city in 1977. He had a 33-year career with Santa Monica, a variety of jobs in maintenance and public works until he retired 5 years ago. But I think we all know him in his longest serving position. He was the supervisor of promenade maintenance. And Eddie and his team were responsible for the cleaning of about 1 million square feet of pedestrian walkways each day. And to this day, I noticed in the photo that City Manager Cole showed how clean the promenade still is. Eddie was known as the Dean of Clean, and he's the one who set that standard. Eddie had a deep affection for the 3rd Street Promenade. He called it the crown jewel of Santa Monica, and he took pride in the work that he and his team did there every day. He is survived by 3 children, a sister, and several nephews. And I remember being at the ceremony on the promenade when Eddie retired after 30 years. And it's with great sadness tonight that we convey to his family our deepest condolences. He will be sorely missed by all of us. And with that, the City Council meeting of October 13th, 2015 is adjourned. We'll be coming back in a week for a special meeting on Tuesday night, October 20th, to take a look at the float-up of the 4th, 5th, and Arizona project that was talked about briefly tonight. So until then, we are adjourned. Good night.